I still remember the first night I walked into Hollow Creek Hospital. The place had been abandoned for over a decade, its walls scarred with peeling paint and its windows coated in a fine layer of dust. Most people in town whispered about it in passing, about strange lights and noises that could be heard if you stayed too close at night. Me, I just needed a job. The security company promised steady hours, overtime pay, and a quiet place to think. I didn't care about the stories. The first thing that struck me when I walked in was the smell. It was the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes and hair, the heavy, metallic scent of old blood mixed with the sourness of damp wood. I took a deep breath, trying to push it out of my mind, and flicked on my flashlight. Its beam cut through the darkness like a small blade, revealing stretches of cracked linoleum, rusted gurneys, and wheelchairs that looked as if they had been abandoned mid-use. I made my round slowly. The hospital was enormous, more like a maze than a building. Each hallway seemed to stretch further than the last, bending at odd angles and disappearing into shadows. The wind outside rattled the windows, but inside, the silence was worse, thick, heavy, pressing against my ears. I could almost hear my heartbeat in the empty halls, each thump echoing back like a warning I didn't want to acknowledge. It was around 1:17 a.m. when I heard it. My phone, lying on the desk near the security office, buzzed with a soft, insistent vibration. I picked it up, expecting it to be a wrong number or a prank call from a friend. The screen displayed an unknown number. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen, and then pressed answer. "Hello," my voice sounded loud in the empty office, startling even me. The line was silent for a moment. Then a voice spoke, soft, almost gentle, but with an undertone that made my stomach twist. "Good evening, Mr. Carter." My pulse jumped. My name. How did this person know my name? Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was another pause, then a soft chuckle. "You don't need to worry. We've been expecting you." I froze, expecting me. I didn't know anyone was expecting me here. This was supposed to be a simple security job. "Look, I think you've got the wrong number," I said, trying to laugh it off. But the sound came out tight, nervous. "You're here now. That's all that matters." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at my phone, the black screen reflecting the dim fluorescent lights above. My hands were shaking, but I told myself it was just nerves. Hollow Creek had a way of getting under your skin, especially on the first night. I decided to continue my rounds, flashlight cutting a narrow path through the darkness. Each step felt heavier than the last, my shoes making soft scuffing noises against the cracked linoleum. The building groaned around me, settling in ways that seemed almost deliberate. I passed the old cafeteria, its windows dark and dirty, and the faint smell of rotting food lingered. I remembered seeing photographs online of the place when it was still operational, bright, clean, filled with patients and staff, but now it looked as if time had swallowed it whole. When I reached the East Wing, a section labeled for psychiatric patients, I felt a chill crawl along the back of my neck. The doors were mostly boarded up, but one door at the end of the hallway was slightly ajar. A thin sliver of darkness spilled into the corridor, and for a moment I thought I saw movement inside. "Hello," I called softly. My own voice sounded foreign in the stillness. There was no answer. I stepped closer and the floor creaked beneath my weight. That sound was loud enough to make me flinch, echoing through the empty halls. I leaned in, peering through the crack in the door. It was just a room, dusty and empty, the remnants of old hospital beds and broken furniture. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. I turned away, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling didn't leave. The air seemed heavier here, charged with something I couldn't name. I moved to the nurses' station down the hall, where old charts and files lay scattered across the counters. Most of them were yellowed and brittle, the ink fatting. A few were pinned neatly in stacks, as if someone had been sorting them not too long ago. I sat down, running my fingers over the papers. The names, dates, and notes made my skin crawl. Some of the entries were routine, others not so much. patients admitted with odd symptoms, patients who disappeared. One entry had a note written in a shaky hand. We must keep them quiet. No one must know. The handwriting looked familiar, almost like it belonged to someone I knew, though I couldn't place it. I didn't know how long I sat there, reading and rereading the files. Time passed differently in Hollow Creek, stretching and folding in ways that made the night feel endless. Eventually, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. My hands were trembling as I answered. "Mr. Carter," the voice whispered, slower this time, more deliberate. "You're not alone." I swallowed hard, feeling a tight knot form in my chest. The line went dead again, leaving me with nothing but the hum of the flickering fluorescent light above. I wanted to leave, to run to the safety of my car outside, but something anchored me in place. A mix of curiosity and fear, the same feeling that keeps you staring down a dark hallway even when you know you should turn back. I stood and continued my rounds, moving deeper into the hospital. Each hallway seemed longer now, twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. The shadows moved with me, though I knew there was nothing there. Occasionally, I thought I heard whispers, so faint I wasn't sure if I imagined them. But they made me pause, made my heart beat faster, made me question why I had taken this job at all. When I reached the main lobby again, the silence pressed down on me like a weight. The front doors were locked, the glass grimy and streaked. Outside, the moon hung low, casting a pale, cold light through the windows. I shivered and glanced back at the hallways, the darkness stretching endlessly behind me. Then my phone buzzed one more time. The screen lit up with the same unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "You're doing well, Mr. Carter," the voice said softly. "Not many last past the first night, but you might stay." I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the lobby, to run and never look back. But I didn't move. I only listened as the line went silent, the weight of those words sinking into me. I sat back in the security office, flashlight resting on the desk, and tried to convince myself it was just a prank. But deep down, I knew this was something different. Hollow Creek wasn't just abandoned. It was waiting, watching, and somehow it already knew me. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I watched the hallways, listened to the hum of the fluorescent lights, and waited. Because I had a feeling that first call, that soft, knowing voice, was only the beginning. After the first night, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. I told myself the calls were a prank, maybe someone from the company trying to scare me. But the way the voice said my name, so calm, so certain, didn't feel like a joke. It felt personal. The next evening, I walked into Hollow Creek with a different kind of awareness. I checked the locks, tested the alarms, and made sure my flashlight was fully charged. I didn't want to feel unprepared again. I told myself I'd stay focused, keep to my route, and ignore anything that felt strange. The building didn't feel different on the surface. It still looked like a place that time had forgotten. The same cracked floors, the same rusted beds, the same faded signs pointing to wings that no longer existed. But the air felt heavier now, like the hospital was listening. I started my rounds at the same time I always did, moving through the lobby and then into the long corridors that spread out like a maze. The lights were still flickering in places, and the darkness between them seemed deeper than it should be. I tried to keep my breathing steady, telling myself that was the only sound I should be hearing. At about 11:30 p.m., I turned into the east wing again. The hallway was long, straight, and lined with old patient rooms. The doors were closed, most of them nailed shut. The paint on the walls was peeling in long strips, and the floor tiles were cracked and worn. The whole place had the feeling of a place that had been abandoned in a hurry. As I walked, my flashlight beam moved slowly across the hallway, revealing shadows that looked like they were holding their breath. I tried not to think about it. I kept my eyes forward, my steps slow, and my mind focused on the task. But then I heard something behind me. It was soft at first, barely audible, a faint tapping, like someone's shoes hitting the floor. I paused, my heart beating harder. I turned my head slowly, expecting to see a coworker or maybe a stray animal that had gotten inside, but the hallway was empty. I waited, the silence returned. My breath felt too loud in my ears. I started walking again and the sound returned, quiet, rhythmic, like footsteps. It was the same pace as mine, matching my steps exactly, as if someone was walking right behind me. I didn't want to look back. I told myself that if I did, I would see nothing and the feeling would pass. But the footsteps kept coming. I tried to speed up, hopping to outrun whatever it was. My shoes scraped against the floor and the sound of my own steps seemed to echo in the long corridor. Still, the other footsteps stayed behind me, matching me perfectly, never falling behind, never getting closer. I stopped again. I stood very still and listened. The footsteps stopped too. The silence returned, heavy and thick. I felt my skin go cold. I turned slowly, trying to look as normal as possible, as if I wasn't scared. But there was no one there. The hallway was empty. I stared down the corridor, my flashlight beam shaking slightly. The darkness seemed to swallow the light, like the hallway was deeper than it should be. The air felt cold, colder than the rest of the building. I could see my breath in front of me, even though the air wasn't supposed to be that cold. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the building was settling, making noises that sounded like footsteps. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me because of the phone calls. I took a few steps forward again, trying to act normal. I kept my back straight and my shoulders steady. I told myself I was safe. I told myself I was in control. Then I heard the footsteps again. This time they were louder, more deliberate, like someone was walking with purpose. They were right behind me, but when I turned, there was no one there. The hallway stretched on, long and empty. The doors on either side remained closed. The signs above them, faded and worn, still pointed to rooms that no one used anymore. I kept walking, but my mind was racing. I couldn't stop thinking about the voice on the phone. How did it know my name? How did it know I was here? And why did it sound like it was inside the building with me? I reached a corner where the hallway turned left. I had walked this path before, but now the turn looked wrong. It seemed too sharp, too sudden. It made the hallway feel even longer, like it was stretching just to keep me inside. I turned the corner and continued down the next stretch. The light flickered overhead, and the shadows seemed to move in the corners of my eyes. I kept my flashlight beam steady, focusing on the floor and the walls. That's when I noticed something strange. The hallway looked different. Not dramatically different, but enough to make my stomach drop. The tiles were the same, the walls were the same, the doors were the same, but the pattern of the peeling paint was different. The cracks in the floor were in different places. The signs on the walls were faded in a different way. It was as if I had walked into a different hallway that looked almost identical, but wasn't the same. I stopped again and turned around. The hallway behind me was still there. It looked normal, the same old corridor I had been walking through. But when I turned back to continue, the hallway in front of me didn't match. My mind tried to make sense of it. I tried to convince myself it was just my eyes playing tricks. Maybe the flickering lights were making everything look wrong. Maybe the building was just old and uneven. But something in me knew it wasn't just that. I walked forward slowly, my flashlight beam trembling. The hallway seemed to stretch further, like it was longer than it should be. I could feel the air growing colder, and my breath came out in little clouds. I began to feel a pressure in my chest, like the air was thicker here. I felt watched, not in a way that made my skin crawl, but in a way that made my body feel heavy, like I was being weighed down. The footsteps returned. They were not behind me this time. They were in front of me. My heart stopped. The sound was coming from further down the hallway, from a place I couldn't see yet. The footsteps were slow, careful, almost like someone was trying not to be heard. But the sound was clear, close enough to make my skin prickle. I stood frozen, listening. The footsteps stopped. The silence returned. I held my breath. My mind raced. I wanted to call for help, but I didn't know who would answer. I wanted to run, but I didn't know where the exit was. I wanted to turn around, but I felt like the hallway behind me might not be there anymore. I waited for a long time, and then the footsteps began again. This time they came closer. I didn't move. I couldn't move. My body felt frozen in place, like my muscles had forgotten how to work. The footsteps grew louder, and I could hear the soft scuff of shoes against the floor. They stopped just beyond the edge of my flashlight beam. My breath shook. I wanted to turn on the flashlight brighter, but I was afraid of what I would see. The footsteps began again, moving slowly toward me. I felt something in my chest tighten, a sudden fear that wasn't just about what was in front of me. It was about the feeling that I had been walking this hallway for hours. It was about the way the building seemed to shift and change around me. It was about the calls on my phone. It was about the idea that I might not be alone in this place. The footsteps reached the edge of my life. And then they stopped. The silence returned, thick and heavy. I stood there, staring into the darkness, waiting for something to happen, waiting for a shadow to move, waiting for a voice. But nothing happened. After a while, I took a shaky step forward. My flashlight beam cut deeper into the hallway. The darkness swallowed the light, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I walked slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. The hallway continued, and continued, and continued. I kept walking, and the hallway never seemed to end. Every corner looked the same. Every door looked the same. Every crack in the floor looked like the one before it. It felt like I was trapped in a loop, walking the same path over and over again. My mind began to race. I tried to remember where the security office was. I tried to remember how to get back. But the hallway kept stretching and the building kept changing, just enough to make me feel lost. I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm. It's just a building. It's just a building. But I knew it was. I knew something was wrong. And I knew the footsteps were still there, somewhere behind me, following me, even when I couldn't hear them. I didn't know how long I had been walking when I finally found the door. It wasn't marked in any way that made sense. No sign above it, no faded label on the wall. It was just a heavy metal door that looked like it belonged in a storage room, not in a hospital. The paint was peeling off in thick layers and the hinges were rusted. There was a small window near the top, but the glass was dirty and cracked, so I couldn't see through it clearly. I stood there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking. My flashlight beam trembled as I held it up to the door. The hallway behind me felt like it was stretching away, like I had been walking for hours without moving. I didn't know why I felt drawn to this door. I didn't know why I felt like it was important, but something in me told me to go inside. I pushed the door open. It creaked loudly and the sound echoed down the hallway like a warning. The room inside was dark. The air smelled like old paper and dust. I stepped in, my shoes making a soft scuffing sound on the floor. My flashlight beam cut across the room, revealing rows of metal shelves, stacked with boxes and folders. A file room. I felt a strange, sick feeling in my stomach. I had seen old files before in offices and storage rooms, but this felt different. This felt like a place where secrets were kept, a place where things were hidden. I walked deeper into the room, my flashlight beam moving slowly over the shelves. The boxes were labeled with dates and departments. Some were marked records, others patient files, and a few had labels that made my skin crawl. Psychiatric, observation, containment. Containment. I didn't want to read that word. I didn't want to think about what it meant, but my eyes kept moving, drawn to the files like a magnet. I pulled a box off the shelf. It was heavy, full of papers. I set it down on a table and opened it. The files inside were old, brittle, and yellowed with age. The ink had faded, but the writing was still legible. I began to read. At first it was normal. Patient names, dates of admission, diagnoses, notes from doctors. It was the kind of paperwork that made a hospital feel real, like a place where people came for help. But then the notes started to change. There were entries about patients who were admitted and never discharged. There were notes about unexplained disappearances and missing beds. Some records had lines scratched through them, as if someone had tried to erase the truth. One file caught my eye. It was thicker than the others, like it held more pages. The label on the front was handwritten, not typed. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant, but there was a small, uneven pressure in some of the letters, like the writer had been shaking. I opened it. The first page was a list of names. They were all women. Each name had a date next to it, and each date had a short note. Most of the notes were simple: admitted for observation, transferred to room 12, discharged. But a few had notes that made my skin go cold. One read, patient quiet, no signs of life, do not disturb. Another, still breathing, keep on the floor, do not alert staff. I read on, and the notes became more disturbing. The handwriting grew shakier, as if the writer was losing control. Keep them here. Keep them quiet. Do not let them scream. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I felt a cold sweat forming on my skin. I tried to tell myself it was just a doctor's notes, written by someone who didn't understand how to treat their patients. But the words didn't sound like medical notes. They sounded like orders, like instructions. I turned the page. There was a photograph inside the file. It was old, black and white, and the image was slightly blurred. It showed a woman lying on a hospital bed, eyes closed, arms at her sides. She looked peaceful, like she was sleeping. But there was something wrong. Her mouth was slightly open and her face looked too calm, like she was alive. I felt my stomach drop. I looked closer at the photograph and I noticed something in the background. A figure standing in the corner of the room, half hidden in shadow. The figure was tall and thin, wearing what looked like a dark coat. I couldn't see the face clearly, but I could see the shape of the head, the way it tilted slightly, like it was watching. I turned the page quickly, as if the figure might reach out from the paper and grab me. The next pages were filled with notes about the same woman. Her name was listed, her age, the date she was admitted. There were notes about her symptoms, her family, her history. But then the notes shifted again. They stopped talking about her as a patient. They started talking about her as a body. The notes described how she had been moved, how she had been placed in certain rooms, how she had been kept quiet. The language was clinical, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't a patient. This was a victim. I sat there, my hands shaking, reading the words over and over. The more I read, the more I felt like the room was closing in on me. The air felt thick. The silence felt heavy. The building felt alive. I kept reading. There were more files, more names. Each one had the same pattern. Women admitted, women kept, women never discharged. Some files had notes about the killer's method, as if someone had been documenting it. It was like the hospital itself had been part of the crime, like it had been a hiding place. I couldn't understand how this had been allowed to happen. How could a hospital, a place people trusted, be used to hide victims? How could the staff have ignored it? Or worse, how could the staff have been involved? My mind kept returning to the phone calls, the voice on the line so calm, so certain. We've been expecting you. You're not alone. Not many last past the first night. I looked at the file again, the one with the list of names. I scanned the pages, searching for something I didn't want to find. Then I saw it. A name. My name. Not just my name, but my address too. It was written in the same handwriting as the rest of the file. The ink was faded, but the letters were clear. My name, my address, and a date. A date that was tomorrow. My hands went numb. My mind went blank. I stared at the page, unable to move. I tried to make sense of it, but it felt like my brain was refusing to accept the truth. How could my address be in this file? How could my name be on a list of victims? I turned the page, hoping it would be a mistake. Maybe it was someone else with the same name. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was a prank. But the next page had more details. It described a man my age with my build. It described my habits, my routines, the way I walked. It described the job I had, the shift I worked. It described the way I came to Hollow Creek Hospital and the way I had been welcomed. It described the way I had been followed. My breath came out in a shaky whisper. I felt like the room was spinning. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak. I felt like I might collapse right there, among the old files and the dust. The silence in the room was almost unbearable. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged. I could hear my heart beating like a drum in my chest. I put the file down slowly, like I was afraid it would burn me. I stepped back from the table and looked around the room. The shelves stretched up high, filled with boxes and folders. The air smelled like old paper and dust, but now I could also smell something else. A faint metallic scent. The same scent I had smelled the first night. Blood. I backed away from the table, my flashlight beam shaking. I turned toward the door. And that's when I noticed it. There were footprints on the floor. They were faint, but they were there. Dark marks in the dust, leading from the back of the room to the table where I had been sitting. And then they continued toward the door, as if someone had been standing behind me while I read. I stood very still, my body frozen. The footsteps were fresh. They weren't old. They were not from years ago. They were recent. Someone had been in the room with me. And they had been watching. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed the file and shoved it back into the box. I shoved the box back onto the shelf. I closed the door behind me and locked it, even though I wasn't sure the lock still worked. I ran. I ran down the hallway, not caring where I was going, just wanting to get away. The building seemed to shift around me, the corridors stretching and bending like they wanted to keep me inside. The footsteps followed me, not close, but always there, echoing in the distance. When I finally reached the security office, I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing hard. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so loud it felt like it might burst. I looked at my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Just the quiet, empty screen. But I knew the file was real. I knew my name was in it. I knew someone had been watching me. And I knew, without a doubt, that Hollow Creek Hospital was not just abandoned. It was waiting. Not really. I lay in the small chair in the security office, my phone pressed against my chest like a lifeline. The building around me was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like a blanket that someone had pulled over your head. Every time the fluorescent lights flickered, I flinched. Every time the building creaked, I held my breath. I kept thinking about the file room, about the list of names, about my name, about the date that was tomorrow. I kept telling myself it was a mistake. I kept telling myself it was a prank. I kept telling myself that I had just been reading too much into old paperwork. But the truth was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The next shift came. I didn't want to go back. I wanted to quit. I wanted to leave and never return. But I needed the money. I needed the steady hours. And I needed to know what the file meant. So I went back. The building looked the same as always. The same broken windows, the same peeling paint, the same dark hallways. But now I noticed things I hadn't noticed before. The way the shadows seemed to move a little too slowly. The way the air felt colder in certain areas. The way the building seemed to breathe. I started my rounds, moving through the halls with my flashlight. I tried to keep my mind focused on the routine. Check the doors, check the windows, walk the corridors. make sure nothing is moving. But the building didn't want me to focus. It wanted me to notice. I reached the final wing, the one I hadn't explored yet. It was the farthest part of the hospital, the part that was always boarded up, the part that no one talked about, the part that, when I walked past it, felt like the air changed. The door was locked, but the lock was old and rusted. It gave way with a soft click when I pushed it. The door opened with a groan, and a cold breath of air spilled out, as if the wing had been holding its breath for years. The hallway inside was narrow and dim. The walls were stained with old water damage, and the floor tiles were cracked. The lights flickered, but the hallway was still darker than the rest of the hospital. It felt like the building was keeping this part of itself hidden. I stepped inside. The air felt heavier here. The smell was different. It wasn't just old dust and decay. There was a faint, sweet scent like medicine, like something that was supposed to help you sleep. I walked slowly, my flashlight beam sweeping across the walls. The hallway seemed to stretch farther than it should. I felt like I was walking in a dream, like the world around me was slightly off. As I walked, I heard it. Soft whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the whispers had a rhythm. They sounded like words, but I couldn't make them out. They sounded like someone speaking very quietly, as if they were trying not to be heard. I stopped. The whispers stopped too. My heart thumped in my chest. I stood very still, listening. The silence was thick. The air felt heavy. My flashlight beam trembled in my hand. I started walking again. The whispers returned, faint and distant, like they were coming from far down the hallway. They were closer now, but still too quiet to understand. I felt my skin go cold. I kept walking, my footsteps slow. I didn't want to run. Running felt like admitting I was afraid. I wanted to keep control, even if it was just for a little while. The hallway turned to the left, then to the right, then to the left again. The turns were confusing, and the hallway seemed to stretch on endlessly. The whispers followed me, always just out of reach, like someone was walking behind me, whispering my name but never close enough for me to hear clearly. I reached a door at the end of the hallway. It was different from the others. It wasn't nailed shut. It wasn't rusted. It was a clean, white door with a small window in the top. There was a sign on it. Quiet room. I stood in front of it, my hand hovering over the handle. The whispers were louder now. They sounded closer, as if they were inside the room. I could feel the air on the other side of the door, cold and still. I told myself to leave. I told myself to go back. I told myself that this was too much, that I didn't need to know. But I couldn't turn away. I opened the door. The room inside was small. It looked like it had once been a patient room, but it was empty now. There was a single bed in the center with white sheets that were surprisingly clean. The sheets looked new, like they had been changed recently. The bed was made neatly, as if someone had prepared it for a patient. There was a small table next to the bed, with a glass of water on it. The water looked clear, like it had been poured recently. I could see tiny droplets on the side of the glass, as if it had been placed there only moments ago. The air in the room felt colder than the hallway. It felt like the kind of cold you feel when you step into a freezer. I could see my breath in front of me. The whispers were louder now, but I still couldn't understand them. They sounded like a soft chorus, like a group of people speaking at once, but in a way that didn't make sense. It was almost like they were trying to lull me into sleep. I walked slowly toward the bed. My footsteps felt loud in the quiet room. I reached the edge of the bed and stared at the sheets. They looked clean, but there was a faint stain near the corner. A small, dark mark, like a drop of something that had soaked into the fabric. I felt my stomach turn. I stepped closer and saw that the stain wasn't on the sheet. It was under it. Something was beneath the fabric, something that was pushing up slightly, like it was trying to break through. I reached out and lifted the corner of the sheet. The room seemed to hold its breath. Under the sheet was a body. Not a full body, just a shape. A lump like a person curled up in a fetal position. The shape was covered in the sheet, but I could see the outline of a head and shoulders. The shape was still, too still. My hands shook as I pulled the sheet back further. The body was there. A person curled up on the bed. Their face was turned away, hidden. Their skin looked pale, almost gray. Their hair was damp as if they had been sweating. Their clothes were old, like they had been wearing them for a long time. I couldn't see their face, but I could see their hands. Their hands were relaxed, like they were asleep. There was no tension in their fingers, no sign of struggle. It looked like they had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. I felt a strange mix of fear and sadness. I felt like I was looking at someone who had been forgotten, someone who had been left here, alone, to fade away. I turned away from the body and looked around the room again. The whispers were louder now, like they were all around me. I could feel them in the air, like a soft pressure on my skin. I realized something. The room wasn't empty. It wasn't just me. The whispers weren't coming from outside. They were coming from inside the walls, from inside the bed, from inside the room itself. I felt my throat tighten. I took a step back, my flashlight beam shaking. The whispers grew louder, and for the first time I thought I heard a word. My name, quietly spoken like a secret. I froze. The whispers continued, but now I could hear them more clearly. Not words exactly, more like sounds. Soft, slow, rhythmic, like someone humming. Like someone singing a lullaby. I stared at the bed again, and the shape beneath the sheet shifted slightly. Just a small movement, like someone turning in their sleep. It was so small I almost thought I imagined it. But then the shape moved again a little more. The body seemed to settle, as if it was adjusting itself. The sheet rustled softly. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. My mind raced. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. I wanted to get away from this room and never come back. But I couldn't move. The whispers were calling to me. They sounded soothing, like they were trying to calm me down, like they were trying to make me comfortable, like they were trying to make me sleep. I took a step back toward the door. My hand reached for the handle. The whispers stopped. The silence returned, heavy and thick. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The air felt warmer, less heavy. The whispers faded into the distance. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing hard. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing. I looked down the hallway and saw something that made my blood run cold. The hallway was filled with faint shapes like shadows moving slowly in the darkness. They were all around me, just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. They didn't move quickly. They didn't run. They just drifted like people in a dream. And they were all looking at me. I backed away from the door, my flashlight beam shaking. I turned and ran, not caring where I was going. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, like it was trying to keep me inside. I ran until I reached the security office. I slammed the door shut and sat down in the chair, my back against the wall. I stared at the door, listening. I could still hear the whispers, faint now, like they were far away, but I knew they were still there. I knew the hospital was still treating people. And I knew somehow that I was one of them. Most people listen to music through apps now. They stream podcasts, watch videos, and scroll through playlists like they're flipping through channels. But for me, radio was still something real. It was a voice in the dark, a sound that traveled through the air unseen and reached you in a way that felt almost personal. That's why I kept my little late-night show going, even when the station cut budgets and the audience shrank. I had a small group of regular listeners, people who would call in around midnight, whispering into the phone like they were afraid someone might hear them. They'd tell me about their nights, their worries, their lonely hours. I liked that. It made the job feel less like work. My show was called Midnight Echoes. The name sounded dramatic, but the show was simple. I played slow music, read a few messages, and then talked in a quiet voice like I was talking to someone in the next room. I always kept the volume low. I liked the feeling of speaking softly into the darkness. One night around 2:30 a.m., I was doing my usual routine. The station was quiet. The other staff had gone home. I was alone in the studio, surrounded by old equipment and dusty cables. The air conditioner hummed and the fluorescent lights flickered slightly, like they were tired too. I was about to play a slow song when the radio scanner on my desk beeped. It was a habit I had. When the station was quiet, I liked to scan the frequencies, just to see what was out there. Sometimes I'd pick up a distant station from a town miles away. Sometimes I'd hear nothing but static. But that night, the scanner picked up something unusual. A faint signal buried under the static. It wasn't strong, but it was there. The kind of signal you only notice if you're listening for it. I leaned closer, my eyes narrowing. I adjusted the dial, trying to clear the sound. The static shifted, and then I heard it. A soft lullaby, barely audible. It was slow, simple, and strangely calming. The melody was familiar in a way I couldn't place, like a song you heard as a child but forgot over time. It played between bursts of static, as if the station was fading in and out. I sat there, listening, my heart slowing. The lullaby felt like it was meant for someone who was already half asleep. It felt like a song that could lull you into a dream. I adjusted the dial again, trying to make the signal clearer. The lullaby grew slightly louder, and I could hear a voice singing along, very softly. The voice was gentle, almost soothing, but there was something in it that made my skin prickle. It wasn't a happy song. It wasn't cheerful. It was the kind of lullaby that feels like it belongs in a hospital, not a nursery. The kind of lullaby that sounds like it's meant to calm someone who is in pain. I looked at the scanner display. The frequency was not one I recognized. It wasn't a local station. It wasn't listed in any of the station guides. It was like a ghost frequency, a signal that shouldn't be there. I grabbed my notebook and wrote the number down. I didn't know why I did it, but I felt like I needed to remember it. I kept listening, and the lullaby continued, weaving in and out of the static like a memory trying to return. I tried to find the source. I checked the station's equipment, the transmitter, the connections. Everything looked normal. There was no sign of interference, no explanation for the signal. I decided to call the station manager in the morning. Maybe someone had set up a new low-power station. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was just a strange anomaly. But in the moment, sitting alone in the studio, the lullaby felt like a presence. It felt like someone was reaching out through the air, using the radio as a way to speak. I tried to shake it off. I turned the scanner off and started my show again. I played a slow song, read a few messages, and tried to keep my voice steady. But the lullaby stayed in the back of my mind, like a soft sound you can't quite place. At around 3:15 a.m., the lullaby returned. This time it was louder. The static faded, and the melody became clearer. The voice singing along was more distinct. It sounded like a woman, but the voice didn't sound like anyone I knew. It sounded like someone who had been singing the same song for a long time. I adjusted the dial again, trying to find the frequency more precisely. The scanner display showed the number, and I stared at it for a long time. The number looked familiar, but I couldn't remember why. Then, as I listened, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The lullaby wasn't just playing. It was changing. The melody was shifting slightly, like someone was improvising. The voice was humming different notes, as if it was responding to something. The song was becoming more personal, more intentional. It felt like the radio was listening to me. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. I tried to breathe slowly to calm myself. The lullaby continued, soft and steady. The voice was still there, humming along. Then I heard a faint whisper beneath the music. At first, I thought it was just the static, but the whisper was too clear, too deliberate. It sounded like someone saying my name. Not loudly, not clearly, just a soft, quiet whisper that seemed to come from inside the radio itself. I opened my eyes and stared at the scanner. My hands were sweating. My heart was beating faster, but not in a panic, more like a warning. I adjusted the dial again, trying to make the sound clearer. The whisper came again, and this time I could make out the words. "Hello." The voice was so soft, it was almost a breath. I felt a chill run through me. I looked around the studio as if someone might be standing behind me, but I was alone. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the equipment and the faint sound of the lullaby. I picked up the phone and dialed the station manager's number, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't dial properly. I hung up, took a deep breath, and tried again. The call went through. "Hey," the manager said, sounding tired. "What's up?" I forced my voice to sound normal. "Do you know anything about a station on a frequency around 92.7 or something like that?" There was a pause on the other end. "No, why?" I just picked up something strange. It sounded like a lullaby, like a radio station that shouldn't be there. The manager sighed. "Must be interference. You know how these things are, just ignore it." I tried to agree, but my mind kept returning to the lullaby. It felt too deliberate to be interference. It felt like someone was trying to reach me. I hung up and turned back to the scanner. The lullaby was still playing. The voice was still singing softly. And the whispering voice was still there, barely audible beneath the music. I listened closely, and the whisper came again. This time it was clearer. "Are you alone?" My heart skipped a beat. I looked around the studio again. The lights were still flickering. The air conditioner still hummed. Everything looked normal, but the radio felt wrong, like it was no longer just a machine, like it was a doorway. I didn't answer. I didn't want to speak into the radio, not if someone was on the other side. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing I was listening. I didn't want to admit that I heard them. But the whisper came again. This time, it was not a question. It was a statement. "We've been waiting." The words hung in the air like a fog. The lullaby continued, soft and calm, like nothing was wrong. But the words echoed in my mind. Waiting for what? Waiting for who? I turned off the scanner. The lullaby stopped instantly, like someone had turned off a switch. The studio went quiet and the silence felt heavy. The air felt still, as if it was holding its breath. I sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just stress, just fatigue, just the loneliness of late-night radio. I told myself I was overthinking. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just reached out through the air and touched me. I wrote the frequency down again, just to remember it. I wrote it in my notebook like it was a secret I wasn't supposed to know. I stared at the numbers for a long time, and then I shut off the studio lights. I went home. I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing the lullaby in my mind, like it was playing softly in the background of my thoughts. I kept hearing the whisper, like someone standing just out of sight. When morning came, I tried to forget about it. I tried to focus on my day, but the frequency stayed with me, like a song you can't stop humming. And that night, when I returned to the station, I knew I would turn the scanner on again. Because something was out there. Something that had been forgotten. And something that had found a way to speak. Not because I was afraid, at least not at first. I told myself it was just the adrenaline. I told myself it was the kind of thing that happens when you hear something strange in the middle of the night. But as the hours passed, the feeling in my chest didn't go away. It didn't ease. It stayed, like a quiet pressure that wouldn't let me forget. The next day, I tried to act normal. I went to work, did my shift, and tried to keep my mind on the tasks. But every time I looked at the radio scanner, my thoughts drifted back to the lullaby, back to the whisper, back to the words, "We've been waiting." I decided I needed to know more. I needed to understand what I had heard. So after my shift, I stayed behind at the station and started digging. I looked through old records, old station logs, and old broadcast schedules. The station had been around for decades, but it had changed hands several times. The paperwork was messy. Some records were missing. Some were torn. It looked like someone had been trying to erase parts of the history. I found a list of old frequencies the station had used over the years. I checked the dates and the notes, looking for anything unusual. That's when I found a reference to a frequency that wasn't supposed to exist. It was the same number I had written down, except the record said the station had been shut down years ago. I read the note again. It was a simple line, almost casual. Frequency 91.3, abandoned station. Last broadcast 1998. Abandoned station. Last broadcast 1998. I stared at the paper, my mind going blank. I felt like I had stepped into a cold room. I could feel the air in my lungs change. I tried to think of an explanation. Maybe it was a typo. Maybe it was a different station. Maybe the record was wrong, but the number was the same. The frequency was the same. The lullaby was the same. I needed more. I decided to look up the history of the station itself. I went online, searched old news articles, and checked forums where people talked about local radio. I found something that made my stomach drop. A story from the late 90s about a small radio station that vanished. Not just the station's broadcast, the entire station. The building had been there one day and gone the next. No fire, no demolition, no record of a sale. It was like the station had never existed. The only evidence was a few old memories and a few faded photographs in old newspapers. The article mentioned the station's DJ, a man named Harold Green. He had been the late-night host, much like me. He had a calm voice, a quiet tone, and a small following of listeners who called in at night. Then one night he didn't show up for his shift. People tried to contact him. No answer. The station manager went to the building. The door was locked. No one could get in. By morning, the building was gone. Just gone. The article didn't say where it went. It didn't say what happened to Harold. It didn't say anything that made sense. It just said the station vanished and the town was left with a strange silence. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. My hands were shaking. My mind felt like it was splitting in two. Part of me wanted to laugh, to say it was a weird urban legend. Part of me felt sick, like I had stepped into something I couldn't understand. I looked at the calendar. 1998. That was almost 25 years ago. I thought about the lullaby. I thought about the voice. I thought about the whisper asking if I was alone. I started to feel a connection, like the radio was not just a machine, but a doorway that had been opened before. I needed to know more. I needed to know what happened to Harold Green. The next day, I drove to the address listed in the article. It was a small building on the edge of town, near the old industrial area. The area had been empty for years, but there were still signs of old foundations and broken concrete. The address was a vacant lot now, overgrown with weeds and tall grass. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. The air was still. The only sound was the wind moving through the grass. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing in the wrong place, like the ground under my feet was pretending to be empty, like the building was still there, just out of sight. I pulled out my phone and looked at the old photograph in the article. It showed the station building, a small brick structure with a radio tower behind it. The sign on the front said the station name, but the letters were faded. The photo looked like it had been taken quickly, like someone snapped it in a hurry. I stared at the image, trying to imagine the building standing there. I tried to picture the station, the equipment, the room where Harold would have sat, speaking into the microphone at night. And then I thought about the disappearances. The article mentioned that a string of people had gone missing in the town around the same time the station vanished. It didn't say who. It didn't say why. It didn't say how. Just that the town had lost people, one by one, and no one could explain it. I started to feel like the station and the disappearances were connected. Like the radio signal was not just a broadcast, but a lure, a way to pull people into something. I drove back to the station, my mind racing. I felt like I was being followed, but I couldn't see anyone. The streets were quiet. The town felt asleep, like it was hiding something. That night, I turned on the scanner again. The lullaby returned, soft and slow, like it had never left. The voice was still there, singing along. The whisper returned too, but this time it sounded closer, as if it was right beside me. "Welcome back." My heart stopped. The voice sounded different now. It sounded more confident, more certain, like it knew I would return, like it had been waiting for me. I didn't answer. I didn't want to give it any more attention. But the lullaby continued, and the whisper came again. "We missed you." I stared at the scanner, my hands shaking. I could feel my skin go cold. I could feel my mind trying to protect itself, trying to tell me this was just a trick, just a weird coincidence. But the words didn't feel like a trick. They felt like a welcome to something that had been waiting for me for a long time. I turned the scanner off and sat in the silence, trying to calm my breathing. The studio felt too quiet now. The air felt heavy. The lights seemed dimmer. I felt like the room was closing in. I knew I couldn't ignore it. I knew I couldn't pretend it wasn't real. And I knew that the missing DJ, Harold Green, was not just a story. He was a warning. I couldn't stop thinking about Harold Green, the missing DJ, the vanished station, the lullaby. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the faint melody, winding through the darkness of my mind, gentle but persistent, like it was trying to guide me somewhere. I had to know more. I started digging deeper into the station archives. The old equipment was dusty but functional. Old audio reels were stacked in crates, labeled with dates that went back decades. Some were from the station's earliest broadcasts. Others, more recent, were incomplete, tapes that had been cut, edited, or simply abandoned. As I combed through the reels, I found something that made my heart tight. A folder labeled Listener Calls, Late Night, 1995-1998. It was a thin folder, but I opened it carefully, almost reverently. Inside were pages of handwritten logs, names, times, brief notes about the calls. I skimmed the first few entries. Most were ordinary. People calling in with song requests, little stories about their night, complaints about insomnia. Then I noticed something strange, a pattern, a detail that made my skin crawl. Every caller in the late night hours eventually disappeared. Not all at once, not obviously, but gradually, each one had vanished without explanation, leaving no trace. Some families reported them missing. Some neighbors noticed they just stopped appearing. No notes, no reasons, no explanations, just gone. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. The room felt smaller, all of a sudden heavier. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. I could feel a faint hum in the air, like the station itself was vibrating. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was paranoia. I told myself 1,000 times that there had to be a logical explanation. And yet the more I looked at the list, the harder it became to deny the connection. Every name, every time, every call. The pattern was too perfect, too deliberate. I kept flipping through the pages, my fingers trembling slightly. One name stopped me cold. I had almost missed it. The handwriting was faded, but I could make it out. A young woman named Elaine Turner. She had called at 2:47 a.m. on a Wednesday. The note beside her name said only, hums softly, requests lullaby, sound calming. I shivered. I remembered the lullaby I had heard, that soft, eerie song. My mind started racing. Could it be the same song she requested back then? Could it be that the station, or something behind it, had been reaching through time, through frequencies, calling people one by one? I flipped the page to check the follow-up note. Missing 1995 reported by family. No trace. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisted. The thought that this song, this signal, might still be alive and looking for listeners made the room feel colder. The air seemed thicker. My hands were shaking again, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop looking. As I scanned the list, the pattern became undeniable. People who called the station late at night, people who asked for the lullaby, disappeared shortly afterward. Some names were marked with dates, some with times, some with both. It didn't matter. The station, or whatever it had become, had a pattern, and it was exacting. I paused, letting the information sink in. My pulse was loud in my ears. My eyes burned from staring too long. I felt trapped, like the small studio was closing in around me. And then I noticed something that made me freeze completely. My own name. I almost laughed, then I realized I couldn't. My name, written in the same neat, faded handwriting as the other callers. The note beside it, requested lullaby, response, affirmative. I slammed the folder shut. My heart was racing. I felt the air in the room thicken, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My pulse was hammering in my ears. I couldn't think, I couldn't process it. I kept telling myself it was a mistake, a coincidence. Someone must have been writing this list for some other purpose. It couldn't possibly be real. But I knew better. I could feel it. The air seemed to hum softly. My skin prickled, and I thought I heard a faint, distant melody, almost like the lullaby I had heard through the scanner. It was so quiet I almost doubted it, but my mind insisted it was there. A soft, persistent tune that was creeping into my thoughts. I couldn't stop thinking about the callers. Who were they? How had the station reached them? How had they vanished? I started investigating them individually. I looked up old police reports, missing person cases, news articles. Most were vague. Most offered no details. Some families had left the town. Some had moved on quietly, never speaking about it. But one pattern kept appearing. All the missing callers had something in common. They were alone at the time of the call. They lived alone or were awake while everyone else slept. They had reached out to the station in the quietest hours of the night. And then, after that night, they were gone. I felt like I was staring into a mirror of my own life. Late nights alone, headphones on, microphone in front of me. The lullaby playing softly in my headphones. Was I next? I tried to distract myself, told myself it was ridiculous, but the thought wouldn't leave. Every name I read felt like a warning. Every date, a countdown. Every note, a whisper that reached through the paper into my mind. Then I found a set of recordings, old audio reels labeled with the names of callers. My hands shook as I inserted one into the tape player. The reel spun slowly. The hiss of static filled the room, then a voice. It was a woman's voice, calm, sleepy, requesting a song. The tape creaked, the voice repeating her request, and then a lullaby started. The same melody, the same soft, eerie tune I had heard through the scanner. I froze, my pulse spiked. I listened closely, and in the gaps between notes I heard faint whispers, almost imperceptible at first, faint murmurs under the melody. "We've been waiting. So tired. Come closer." The whispers were slow, deliberate, almost like a conversation meant only for me. The longer I listened, the more I felt it pressing into my mind, tugging at my thoughts. It wasn't loud. It wasn't terrifying in the traditional sense. It was patient, persistent, subtle, relentless. I couldn't stop. I couldn't look away. I scanned the rest of the reels. One by one, the recordings played, each with the same pattern. A caller requesting a song, the lullaby playing, faint whispers in between. I began to recognize the voices, names I had read earlier, stories I had read in the missing person reports. They were all here speaking to me across decades, through tape, through static, through a signal I couldn't explain. And my name was in the folder. My name. The lullaby had already found me, waiting quietly for the night when I would tune in, waiting for me to hear it, to notice it, to be drawn in. I felt a cold sweat run down my back. The room seemed darker now, the lights dimmer. The air thickened. The faint hum of the equipment was no longer comforting. It was warning, it was breathing, it was waiting. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I had gone too far. I had opened the folder. I had listened to the reels. I had seen my name. I knew that whatever this station, or whatever had become of it wasn't finished. It wasn't done. And now I was a part of it. The lullaby began to play softly in my mind again, almost like a memory, almost like a call, almost like a presence just behind me, patient, quiet, waiting. I swallowed hard. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, but deep down I knew it wasn't imagination. The station had found me. The lullaby had found me, and the list had already decided my place among the missing. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just sat there, the folder on my lap, my hands trembling, my mind screaming silently. The soft, eerie melody wrapped around me like a shadow. It whispered secrets I didn't want to hear. And in that quiet, I realized I was listening, exactly like all the others had, and there was no going back. I don't know why I went back. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something else. Something that pulled me, quiet but insistent, toward the abandoned station. I told myself I wasn't afraid. I told myself I just needed to see for myself. But deep down, I knew fear had nothing to do with it. This was something else entirely. The building looked empty, forgotten by time, yet it had an odd presence. The brick walls were cracked and weeds grew up around the foundation, but there was an unnatural stillness, like the air itself had learned to hold its breath. I walked slowly across the cracked concrete, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes, each step echoing in the empty lot. The front door was unlocked. I froze when I saw that. After all the stories, all the warnings, it should have been sealed, should have been gone, but it was. It swung inward with a creak that sounded too loud in the silence, like the building was announcing my arrival. Inside, dust hung in the air, motes drifting through the narrow shafts of moonlight that cut through broken windows. The smell was thick with neglect, old paper, and something faintly metallic I couldn't place. I hesitated in the foyer, my hands pressed to my jacket pockets, feeling the faint tremble in my fingers. The station was exactly as I imagined it would be, yet nothing about it felt normal. The air seemed alive, patient, watching. I walked down the main hallway. Each step echoed off the walls, bouncing back at me like a faint warning. I had to remind myself to breathe slowly, to keep calm. I had to tell myself I was alone. I had to tell myself it was just a building. And yet, the closer I got to the broadcast room, the warmer the air felt. Not hot, not in a physical way, but like someone, or something, had been there very recently. The kind of warmth that seeps into your bones without touching your skin. I pushed open the door. The room was small, narrow. A few consoles lined the walls, dials and sliders coated in dust. Tape reels sat idle, one half spooled, as if someone had walked away and left mid-broadcast. And then I noticed it, the microphone. The studio's microphone, the one used for late-night broadcasts, was warm. Not just room temperature, warm, like someone had been speaking into it minutes ago, maybe seconds. My pulse jumped. My mind screamed, but I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. The microphone seemed alive, vibrating faintly with the memory of voices. I reached out almost instinctively and touched it. The warmth was unmistakable. A subtle hum ran through my fingers. The hairs on my arms stood up. I pulled back quickly, almost tripping over the edge of the desk. Then I heard it. A faint static, almost like the sound of the frequency I had picked up. I froze, my ears straining. The static grew softer, resolving into words. A voice, low, slow, almost too soft to understand. Hello. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It wasn't a recording. It wasn't from the speakers. It was everywhere inside the room, inside my head. The single word stretched out, lingering like smoke. I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry. My heart thumped violently in my chest. I wanted to leave, to run, to escape the room, the building, the sound. But my feet stayed rooted to the floor. My hands trembled at my sides. Do you remember me? The whisper was soft, patient, familiar. It wrapped around my mind like the lullaby I had heard on the scanner. I recognized the cadence of the voice. I recognized it because it sounded like every missing caller, like Harold Green, like the air of the station itself. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind raced. I thought of the folder, the names, the tapes, my own name on that list, the idea that someone or something was waiting for me. The microphone vibrated slightly under my gaze. It was almost imperceptible, like a subtle pulse, but I noticed. I felt it. The warmth seemed to rise, reaching into my chest. The room seemed to breathe with me, slowing, pausing, circling me like a predator. I took a careful step forward, then another. I circled the desk, careful not to touch anything else. I stared at the tape reels, the old controls, the empty chairs. The place felt abandoned, yet alive. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched, that I had never been alone. Then I noticed the console lights. A few flickered faintly, not powered, not from electricity, but from somewhere else. I couldn't explain it. I could only stare as the faint glow pulsed, like the heartbeat of the station itself. The static grew again, filling the room with a soft whispering that threaded through the air. I couldn't make out most of the words, just fragments. Drifting, waiting, you, listen, and then unmistakably, welcome back. My stomach turned. My mind felt as though it were being stretched, tugged at the edges. I backed up slowly, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, just stress, just exhaustion. I told myself I had come too far, that curiosity was dangerous, that I should leave. But I couldn't move. Then I realized something that made my skin crawl completely. The microphone was recording. The red light at the base of the mic blinked faintly, though the equipment had been unplugged for years. The tape reels were still idle, yet somehow the signal, the hum, the whispers, they were being captured, stored, and transformed into what I didn't know. And then the voice changed. It was no longer soft, no longer distant. It was inside me, inside my head, not just the room. Do you hear us? You always hear us. I stumbled backward, my hand hitting the wall. The whisper turned into a soft chorus of voices, layered and patient, each one echoing slightly off the walls. Some sounded like children, some like adults, some like the elderly. Each carried the same slow cadence, the same hypnotic tone. And they were all waiting. I realized then that the warmth of the microphone was not from a person. It was from whatever had been using it, listening, speaking, guiding. The station itself was alive in a way that made no sense, an entity formed from sound, memory, and absence. I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm. I whispered to myself, a reminder of logic, of reality. I told myself that this was a building, this was dust, this was static, and yet the words lingered. I couldn't forget them, couldn't unhear the patience behind them. I approached the microphone again cautiously, almost hypnotically. The whispers softened, coalescing into a single note, a gentle hum, the lullaby. It began to play slowly, stretching across the room, through the walls, into my bones. The voices harmonized with it, faint, distant, echoing across decades. I realized I was standing in the heart of it, the center of something old, vast, and patient. The station had waited for me. The microphone had waited. And now, in this quiet room, I could feel the lullaby touching every memory I had of the missing, of Harold Green, of the listeners I had read about. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape. But the warmth of the microphone, the hum of the voices, the soft persistence of the lullaby, it all held me in place. The whispers drifted closer, yet still gentle. The melody wound itself into my mind like a slow tide, patient, irresistible. Stay with us. The words were soft, but they carried a weight I couldn't resist. And as I stood there, staring at the blinking red light, I realized something that chilled me completely. This wasn't about missing callers. This wasn't about Harold Green. It wasn't about a station or a frequency. It was about the listeners. And I was one of them. I had been driving for hours. The night was heavy and quiet, the kind of darkness that presses in through the car windows and settles on your shoulders. My eyes were tired. My arms ached from gripping the wheel, and every mile felt longer than the one before. I wasn't sure what made me pull off the highway, but a faint flicker of neon in the distance caught my eye. An old roadside motel, its sign buzzing faintly, half broken, casting a sickly yellow glow over the asphalt. I slowed and turned the wheel, tires crunching on gravel. The place looked like it had been forgotten. The paint was peeling, the windows fogged, and the lot was nearly empty except for a single rusted pickup parked near the office. A small bell jingled as I stepped inside, though no one seemed to be there. The air smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke, stale and lingering. I cleared my throat. Hello. From somewhere in the back, a soft shuffle. The clerk emerged, a thin man with pale skin and tired eyes that seemed too aware of the dark corners of the room. He didn't smile, but his lips curved just enough to indicate acknowledgement. Room for the night? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded, his movements deliberate, slow. Name. I gave him my name and he tapped something into an ancient register, the sound of the keys loud in the quiet office. He looked up at me, pale eyes locked on mine. Room 79, he said softly. Second floor, end of the hall. I frowned. 79. I checked the small paper map he handed me, which showed the entire motel layout. There was no 79. The rooms ended at 76. He didn't answer right away, just held my gaze. Finally, he said, "It's there, you'll see." I didn't argue. My body was too tired, too hungry for sleep, to waste energy questioning a man in a dying roadside motel. I grabbed my bag and followed the hallway, the carpet damp and threadbare. The walls faded to a yellowish gray. Every step echoed faintly, swallowed by the silence that seemed to hang over the place like a fog. The stairs creaked beneath my weight. The air felt colder here. I pressed my hand to the wall as I climbed, steadying myself, and I felt it, the kind of chill that sinks past skin and into bones. At the end of the hall, a door waited. It was plain, unmarked, nothing to distinguish it from the others. The key fit, though it felt heavier than it should, and the lock gave a metallic groan as I turned it. Inside, the room was impossible. It didn't match the rest of the motel. The carpet was deep and soft, a dark burgundy that absorbed the faint lamplight. The walls were a muted gray, smooth, untouched. The bed was perfectly made, thick comforter folded back neatly, pillows plump and inviting. A small desk sat in the corner, and beside it, a chair that looked like it had never been sat in. Even the air smelled different, clean, almost antiseptic, yet warm, like a room that had been waiting. I set my bag down on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. My body sighed, finally letting go of some tension. I stared at the ceiling and tried to convince myself it was just a fancy room, a fluke in the aging motel's layout. But then I noticed something else. The window overlooked the parking lot, but not the lot I had entered. It looked like a completely different place. The asphalt was darker, the neon sign flickering more erratically, the road beyond winding into shadow I didn't recognize. No streetlights, no highway markers, just darkness stretching in every direction, broken only by the buzzing of the sign. I pressed my face to the glass. The world outside didn't look real. It looked contained, like someone had built a little scene and left me to watch it. I shook my head, backing away. I told myself I was tired imagining things. That made sense. That was all it could be. I went to the small desk to check my phone. No signal. Not a bar, not a flash of service. Even my GPS seemed to vanish entirely, the map frozen in gray, spinning slightly before settling on an empty void. My stomach tightened. The motel was still real, I told myself. The neon sign, the smell, the creaking floors, they were all real. But this room felt separate, different, alive. I moved toward the bed and sank into it, pulling the comforter over myself. The mattress was firm yet soft, almost perfect in a way that made me uneasy. I stared at the ceiling and tried to will my eyes closed. Sleep should have come easily. I was exhausted. My body begged for it. But sleep didn't come. Instead, I heard it, a soft knocking at the door, 3 light taps, slow, deliberate. My heart skipped a beat. "Hello," I called, my voice betraying a nervous edge. No answer. I waited. Another 3 taps, softer this time, almost like a whisper. I told myself it was the old plumbing, maybe a loose shutter in the wind, anything but what it seemed. But even as I repeated that to myself, the taps continued, precise, patterned, not random, deliberate. Someone or something was there, waiting. I sat up, pulling the comforter tight around my shoulders, staring at the door. The air in the room felt heavier now, the shadows deeper. I couldn't see anything through the peephole. The hallway was empty. My mind tried to rationalize again. Perhaps another guest. Perhaps an employee checking on the room. But no, I knew. I just knew. This wasn't anyone I could see. The clock ticked. My breathing was loud in the silence. I debated leaving, going down the stairs, calling the clerk. But an instinct stopped me. Some deep, inexplicable warning told me to stay put, to wait. And then the knocking stopped. Silent, heavy, total silence. I exhaled slowly, letting my hands drop to my lap. My heart still raced. My mind wouldn't calm. I told myself I had imagined it, the exhaustion, the isolation, the strange little motel, that it was nothing. Then I heard it, the softest creak of the floorboards outside the door. Slow, careful, a step, another. Someone or something was packing just beyond my wall. I could hear it distinctly, the rhythm of footfalls that didn't match the structure of the hallway I had walked. I pressed my back against the headboard, trying to control the tremor in my legs. My eyes darted to the door, to the key still in the lock. The doorknob hadn't moved, yet I could hear the packing, faint but deliberate, as if the hallway outside this room didn't exist on any map I had ever seen. I whispered my own name to myself, a grounding trick. It's just a motel, it's just a room. But I didn't believe it, not fully, not when the sounds continued. The packing, now joined by a soft, almost musical scratching, like someone tracing nails along a wall, carefully, intentionally. I hugged the comforter tighter, staring into the dim corners of the room. The shadows seemed to twist when I looked away, subtle, almost imperceptible movements at the edge of vision. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed wrong, distorted. The bed beneath me, the walls around me, even the soft hum of the neon outside, it all felt separate, unreal. Eventually, I drifted into an uneasy sleep, the kind that is not restful but forced, a liminal state where dreams leak into reality. In that half-dream state, I heard a whisper, unmistakable. "Welcome, we've been waiting." I jolted awake. The room was empty. The door hadn't moved. No one was there. Only the faint hum of the neon outside and the lingering warmth of the bed. I didn't sleep again that night. By morning, the motel looked ordinary, as if the strange, heavy atmosphere had been nothing more than a figment. The map was still missing room 79. The clerk smiled politely, offering breakfast options like nothing had happened. I left quickly, my car tires crunching on the gravel, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something behind, or maybe that something had followed me. Even now, miles down the highway, I can still hear the soft whisper, just at the edge of consciousness, a gentle hum beneath the hum of my car engine, telling me, When I woke the next morning, I expected the room to feel empty, ordinary, like a motel room I could forget. But it didn't. The first thing I noticed was the faint scent, delicate and lingering like old perfume. Soft, floral, almost comforting, but not entirely. It reminded me of something I couldn't place. A memory half forgotten, maybe from childhood, maybe from someone I never knew. The bed was still perfectly made. The room looked untouched. But then I saw it, a glass on the nightstand, half filled with water. Not mine. I hadn't poured it. I stared at it for a long moment, convinced I had imagined it, but it was real. Clear water, the condensation forming tiny rings on the dark wood. I reached for it slowly, hesitant, as if touching it too quickly might trigger something, some hidden presence. The glass was cool, exactly what it should be. Nothing strange physically. But the room itself felt different, alive, watching, waiting. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the glass, trying to think. Maybe the clerk had put it here, maybe some other guest. Maybe the room had a caretaker I hadn't seen. But no, I told myself. That didn't make sense. There had been no one else. The hallway was empty. I hadn't heard footsteps. And then I noticed the mirror. Not the small vanity mirror on the desk. A full-length mirror leaning against the wall near the window. It wasn't perfectly clean. The glass had smudges, fingerprint streaks, as if someone had been standing there, moving in front of it recently. I swallowed. My reflection stared back at me. Tired eyes, pale skin, shadows under my eyes from the night's fitful half-sleep. But there was something else, a movement behind me, a flicker. I turned slowly, every muscle tense. Nothing. The window was still. The night had lifted, leaving a muted gray light filtering in, thin clouds drifting across the morning sky. No one was there. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm my racing heart. Maybe the shadows had played tricks on me. Maybe the perfume had triggered a memory, a hallucination. Maybe the glass of water was just a quirk of the motel, a forgotten gesture. I tried to convince myself, tried to tell myself the room was ordinary, that it wasn't alive, that the strange warmth I had felt yesterday, the whispers, the taps on the door, they were all behind me. I could leave, I could drive away, I could forget this place existed. But I didn't. I moved toward the window, peering out at the parking lot again. The neon sign buzzed softly, more gentle now in the daylight, casting a weak orange glow across the asphalt. The road beyond stretched empty, gray and silent. I could see no one, nothing unusual. The world outside looked normal, mundane even. Yet inside, the room had changed. Subtly, imperceptibly, but enough. The air was heavier than it should have been. The shadows lingered at the corners. The scent of perfume seemed to weave through the room, now stronger, richer, as if someone had just passed through, brushing the air behind them. I sat back on the bed, sipping the water. Cool, tasteless, ordinary. But every sip carried the same unease. Every breath I took seemed to carry a faint whisper of movement. I could almost hear soft steps across the carpet, though I had been alone the entire morning. I thought about the clerk, his pale eyes, his deliberate movements, the way he didn't answer my questions about the room. 7-9 didn't exist. Yet here I was inside it, feeling it breathe around me, feeling it notice me. I decided to explore carefully, slowly. I moved around the room, opening drawers, checking closets, all empty, clean in fact. Not a single item disturbed, not a sign that anyone had actually been here. Yet I could feel traces of presence, like the room remembered, like it kept memory of people it had held even if they had long gone. I opened the closet, a coat hanger, a single robe hanging. I touched the fabric, warm, not room temperature, warm as if someone had just hung it there moments ago. My pulse quickened. I backed away slowly. I needed to leave, but the thought of stepping into the hallway, into the world outside the room, filled me with a quiet dread. I sat back down on the bed, wrapping the robe around my shoulders. The perfume scent seemed to grow stronger, curling around me, filling my senses, making me dizzy with its familiarity and strangeness. My mind wandered. Could the room be keeping people, memories, spirits? I didn't want to think like that, didn't want to believe it. but the evidence was impossible to ignore. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The sunlight shifted slightly through the window, the room's corners dark in contrast, emphasizing the shadows. I noticed the chair by the desk, the one that looked like no one had ever sat in it. I sat there for a while, staring at the glass of water, trying to make sense of the situation. Time became meaningless. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The room seemed to stretch itself, lengthening and shrinking in some subtle, imperceptible way. I could feel the temperature fluctuate slightly, warmth rising and falling as if it were breathing in sync with me. I thought about leaving again. I thought about driving, about never stopping at this motel again. But curiosity, stubbornness, or something deeper rooted in fear and fascination kept me there. I didn't move. I watched the shadows. I inhaled the perfume. I sipped the water slowly, tasting nothing, feeling everything. Eventually, I noticed something else. My reflection in the mirror, not just me, something faint behind my shoulder. A shape, vague and blurred, moving with me. I turned quickly. Nothing. Only the bed, the nightstand, the desk, the glass of water. The perfume lingered. I sat back down heavily on the bed, heart pounding. I realized the room had changed me. Not physically, but in the way it held me, in the way it claimed my attention. I could no longer see it as just a room. It was aware, watching, waiting. I didn't know how long I sat there, drinking, staring, breathing the heavy, sweet air. The scent of old perfume was strong now, and I felt a strange pull toward the closet, the window, even the empty spaces of the room. A pull I could not resist, not if I wanted to leave with my mind intact. I didn't know what I would find. I didn't know if I would ever leave. I only knew that the room had noticed me. It had prepared for me, and I was trapped in the quiet, subtle embrace of its presence. By the time the sun was fully up, the motel looked ordinary again. But I could feel it in the small, invisible ways, the glass of water, the robe, the perfume. The room had been waiting, and it would continue to wait. For me, for anyone, for always. After the first night in that room, I told myself I was done. I told myself I would leave. I told myself I would drive until the road became familiar again. Until the world felt normal, and my mind stopped replaying the strange, quiet moments of the motel. But the room had a way of holding on to you. Not with force, not with violence, but with a slow, gentle pull, like the kind you feel when you wake up from a dream and you can't quite shake the feeling of being watched. The perfume was still there. The glass of water was still half full. The air felt thick, like it had weight. I didn't sleep at all that day. I sat in the chair, staring at the walls, listening to the motel outside, the faint sounds of cars passing far away, the occasional murmur of voices, and the soft buzz of the neon sign. I kept waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. It was quiet, too quiet. And then, just before dusk, I heard it. A faint scratching sound, coming from the closet. At first, I thought it was the old building settling. Maybe a mouse, maybe a loose pipe. But the scratching continued, slow and deliberate, like someone tracing a nail along wood. The sound was so quiet that I almost missed it, but it was there, steady, patient, as if someone had been practicing for a long time. My heart started to beat faster. My mind tried to explain it away, but I could feel the fear creeping in. The fear wasn't loud. It was the kind that sits in your chest and refuses to move. The kind that makes you feel like you're waiting for something that is already here. I stood up slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. I walked toward the closet. The air around it felt colder. The perfume smell grew stronger, almost overwhelming, as if the closet was the source of it. My hand trembled as I reached for the door. The latch was smooth. The door opened without resistance. Inside, there was nothing at first. Just a single robe hanging, the same one I had noticed before. But the back wall of the closet caught my attention. I stared at it and my stomach dropped. Names, carved into the wood. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The letters were shallow, as if they had been etched with a key or a nail. They were old. The wood around them was darkened, as if the carvings had been there for a long time. I stepped closer, my breath shallow, and read the first line. LM 914-1998. My mind went blank. I knew that date. It was a date I had seen in a news report, a missing person, a girl who vanished from a small town not far from here. I had read about it months ago because I had a habit of looking up strange stories online when I couldn't sleep. I remembered her face. A young woman, smiling, her hair tied back, her eyes bright. My throat tightened. I moved down the wall, reading the next line. RT 6022003. Another missing person. Another story I had read. Another face that had stayed in my mind because I couldn't stop thinking about how someone could just disappear. I kept reading. The names were all initials, all dates. The wood was filled with them, carved in neat lines like a list. I couldn't stop. I couldn't tear my eyes away. Each line was a person. Each date was a disappearance. Each initial was a life. And then I saw it. My own initials. My name. Carved into the wall, the letters deep and clear. KA 317-2026. My breath caught. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stared at it, unable to move. The date was today. Today. My mind tried to reject it. It tried to tell me that someone had carved it recently, that the motel had a prankster, that I was in some kind of elaborate joke. But the wood around the carving was dark, aged, as if it had been there for a long time. The letters were not fresh. They didn't look new. My hands started to shake. I backed away slowly, as if the wall might reach out and grab me. My mind raced. I tried to think of a way to explain it. Maybe the initials were a coincidence. Maybe they belonged to someone else with the same letters. But the date was today. That couldn't be a coincidence. I leaned in closer, my eyes scanning the wall. I realized the carvings weren't random. They were organized, like a list, like a record, like a log. And the dates weren't just dates. They were the dates of disappearances. The dates when people vanished and were never found. The dates I had read about online. The dates I had thought about when I couldn't sleep. The dates I had told myself were just tragedies, just bad luck, just the kind of thing that happens in small towns. But here in this room, the dates were a record, a history, a timeline. The perfume scent grew stronger as I stood there. It felt like someone was behind me, close enough to breathe. I spun around, but the room was empty. The bed, the desk, the chair, the window, everything was still. Everything was normal. Except the closet. I stepped back toward it, feeling a strange pull, like the room was trying to draw me closer. I didn't want to go back, but I couldn't stop myself. The list of names felt like a magnet pulling my attention. I wanted to know more. I wanted to understand. I wanted to see if the wall had more. I ran my fingers over the carvings. The wood was rough. The letters were old. The grooves were filled with dust. I could feel the age of them under my skin. And then, as my fingers traced the lines, I noticed something else. There were small symbols next to some of the names. Tiny marks, almost like scratches, almost like tally marks. Some had 1 mark, some had 3, some had none. It felt like a code, a system, a way of keeping track. I stared at the symbols for a long time, trying to make sense of them. My mind started to form a pattern slowly, like a fog clearing. The symbols seemed to mark how long each person had stayed, how long they had been in the room, how long the room had held them. I looked back at the list, searching for the names with the marks. Some names had the most marks, and those dates were the oldest. Some had no marks at all, and those dates were more recent. It felt like the room was tracking them, counting them, keeping a record of who it had taken. My stomach turned. The room wasn't just a place. It was a collector, a keeper of people, a place that held them slowly, quietly, like a trap that didn't need walls. I stepped back, my breathing shallow. The air in the room felt colder. The perfume scent seemed to move, like it was drifting from the closet to the rest of the room, filling every corner. I closed the closet door slowly, my hand trembling. The moment the door shut, the room felt slightly lighter, as if the presence had been contained again. But the fear didn't leave. It stayed, heavy and quiet, like the weight of the carved names. I sat down on the bed, my back against the headboard, and stared at the closet door. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should leave, if I should run, if I should call someone. But my phone still had no signal. My GPS still showed nothing. The motel still didn't appear on any map. I felt trapped, not by walls, but by the knowledge of what the room was. The room was a record, a list, a history of disappearances, and my name was on it. I stared at the closet door until the sun went down. The shadows grew long and the room darkened. The perfume scent grew stronger, as if the night made it more powerful. And in the dark, I heard something soft, almost like someone whispering my name from inside the wall. KH. The voice was faint, like a breath. It was not angry, it was not loud, it was gentle, almost comforting. As if the room was trying to soothe me. As if the room was trying to welcome me. I woke up with a tightness in my chest, the kind that comes when you realize you've been holding your breath without knowing it. The air in the room felt heavier than before, thick with the perfume that had started to feel like a presence instead of a smell. I sat up slowly, staring at the closet door. The carved names were behind it, quiet, hidden, but not gone. The memory of them stayed in my mind like a scar. I had decided, somewhere deep in the night, that I would leave. I told myself I would pack my things, walk down the hall and get in my car. I would drive until the world made sense again. I would never come back. But when I looked around the room, I realized I didn't know where anything was anymore. The bed was still there, but it had shifted slightly, as if it had been moved a few inches to the left. The nightstand was not where I remembered it being. The desk was closer to the window. The chair had been turned, facing the wall instead of the desk. Nothing was dramatic. Nothing was obvious at first glance. It was just wrong. I stood up, my legs shaky. I stepped carefully onto the carpet, listening to the soft, muffled sound of my own footsteps. The room felt larger, or maybe I felt smaller. The space had changed in a way that didn't make sense. I walked to the door and tried the knob. Locked. Not just locked in the normal way. Locked in a way that felt intentional, like the room itself had decided I wasn't leaving. The key was still in my pocket, and I knew it was the same key I had used before, but the lock wouldn't turn. The door didn't budge. My throat tightened. I backed away from it and looked around again, trying to find something familiar, something I could hold onto. That's when I noticed the patterns. The room had rearranged itself into a shape, a pattern like a maze. The furniture had moved in a way that created a path from the bed to the door, but the path was not straight. It curved, then looped, then curved again. It was like the room was guiding me slowly, gently, toward a route it wanted me to take. I stepped forward, trying to follow the path, and the air seemed to shift around me. The perfume smell grew stronger, as if it was moving with me. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, stretching toward the center like hands. I reached the desk and paused. The desk drawer was slightly open, as if someone had been inside it. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I approached it, my heart pounding, and pulled it open. Inside was a small notebook. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed. I flipped it open and saw something that made my stomach drop. It was a list. Names, dates, initials. The same list as the closet, but this one was written in ink. The handwriting was neat, careful, almost gentle. It looked like someone had been keeping track for a long time. And at the bottom of the page, in slightly larger letters, was my name again. K8 3/17/2026. But the date beneath it was different. It wasn't the date of my disappearance. It was the date of my arrival. I stared at it, unable to breathe. The notebook seemed to pulse in my hands as if it were alive. The ink looked fresh, like it had been written recently, like someone had been there, watching, waiting, and recording. I looked up and realized the room had moved again. The bed was closer to the closet. The chair was now near the door. The nightstand had shifted again, blocking the path to the window. The room was changing slowly, subtly, like a tide. I felt like I was inside a living thing that was rearranging its organs. I set the notebook down carefully and stepped back. The air felt colder now. The perfume scent was stronger, almost overpowering. I felt dizzy, like I was standing in a room that was spinning, but the spinning was slow, like a dream. I walked toward the window, hoping to find some clue outside, something that would anchor me in reality. The glass looked the same, the neon sign buzzing faintly. But the view outside had changed too. The road was closer now. The parking lot looked different. The shadows beyond the sign seemed deeper, like they had shifted along with the room. I pressed my forehead to the glass, trying to see clearly, but the world outside looked like a painting. Flat, wrong. The horizon didn't line up. The light was strange, like the sun was in the wrong place. I stepped back from the window and realized something that made my blood run cold. The room was not just rearranging itself. It was rearranging me. The path the furniture created was not random. It was designed to guide me, to trap me, to keep me moving in circles. The room was shaping my movements, slowly pushing me into a pattern I couldn't escape. I walked toward the door again, trying the knob once more. It didn't turn. The lock was tight. The key in my pocket felt heavy, useless. I sat on the bed, my hands shaking, and tried to think. I tried to remember the layout of the room from the night before, but my memory felt foggy, like it had been erased. The more I tried to recall, the less I could. The room was taking my sense of familiarity, reshaping it, making me forget. I stared at the closet door. I had been avoiding it, but I knew I couldn't ignore it forever. The names carved into the wood, the list of disappearances, my own initials. It was all part of this room's purpose. It wanted me to see it. It wanted me to understand. It wanted me to accept. I stood up and walked toward the closet. The perfume scent grew stronger, as if the closet was the heart of the room. I opened the door. The carved names were there, as if they had never been hidden. The wood looked older than before, the letters deeper, the marks clearer. The closet wall felt warm, almost alive. I traced the carvings with my fingers again, feeling the roughness, the age, the history. I noticed the symbols again, the little marks beside some names. This time, I saw something I hadn't seen before. One of the symbols looked like an arrow. It pointed toward the floor. I looked down. There was a small gap in the carpet, a seam that hadn't been there before. The carpet had been shifted, and beneath it, a square patch of wood was visible, as if a trapdoor had been hidden under the floor. My heart raced. I knelt down slowly, my hands shaking as I lifted the edge of the carpet. The wood underneath was old and rough. There was a handle carved into it, like a pole. I hesitated. My mind screamed at me to stop, to leave, to get out. But something in me wanted to know. Something in me wanted to understand why the room was moving, why the names were there, why my own name had been carved into the wall. I reached for the handle and pulled. The trapdoor lifted with a soft creak, revealing a dark space beneath the floor. Not a full basement, not a crawl space. Just a small opening, deep enough for someone to crawl into. The air that rose from it was cold and damp, carrying the scent of old wood and something else I couldn't identify. I stared into the darkness, my breath shallow. The room behind me felt like it was holding its breath. The perfume scent faded slightly, replaced by the smell of the hidden space. The shadows seemed to pull inward, like the room was closing around the trapdoor, waiting for me to make a choice. I could leave. I could walk away. I could go back to the bed, to the door, to the locked hallway. I could accept that I was trapped and try to survive. But the room had already decided. The pattern was clear now. The room moved, rearranged, guided, trapped. It was not a random shifting. It was a design, a system, a way of keeping you in a loop until you made the right move. And the right move, the only move, seemed to be down. I stood there staring at the dark opening, my hands trembling. I could feel the room watching me, waiting for me to choose. The air was quiet. The perfume scent was gone. The silence was thick. I took a slow step forward, toward the trapdoor, toward the unknown, toward the pattern the room had created. And as I lowered myself into the darkness, I realized the most terrifying part wasn't that the room moved. It was that it was patient. It could wait. It could rearrange itself slowly, over and over, until I forgot who I was, until I forgot where I had been, until I became part of the pattern. And the room would keep moving, until I stopped trying to escape, until I accepted it, until I became one of the names carved into the wood. The first time I heard about the lake, it didn't feel like a story. It felt like a warning that had been dressed up as a tale so people could swallow it without choking. I was 22, fresh out of the city, with a rented truck full of gear and a head full of dreams. I'd come to this small town because the paper said there was work. The lake was on the edge of town, tucked behind a line of trees that looked like they'd been standing there forever. The kind of trees that don't move even when the wind pushes hard. I was hired by a man named Hal, a fisherman who'd been doing this longer than anyone could remember. He had a weathered face, the kind that looked like it had been carved out of driftwood. His hands were big and strong, but his fingers had that careful tremble you get from doing the same thing for years. On my first morning, he met me at the dock before dawn. The air was cold and still. The lake looked like glass, smooth and dark, reflecting the sky like it was holding a secret. Hal didn't say much at first. He handed me a life jacket, a bucket, and a long, worn oar. Then he pointed toward the water. "Row out there," he said. "Just a little ways. I want to see what you can do." I nodded, eager to prove myself. I climbed into the boat, feeling the wood creak under my weight. The boat was old, but it looked sturdy. It had that smell of wet rope and sun-warmed wood, the smell of a place that had been used and cared for. I pushed off the dock and started rowing. At first, everything felt normal. The oar dipped into the water and the boat moved. The rhythm was comforting, like something I'd done before. The lake was quiet, almost too quiet. No birds, no insects, just the soft sound of water sliding past the boat. I rowed for a minute, then another. The shoreline behind me stayed the same. The trees didn't get smaller. The dock didn't drift away. I kept rowing. The lake didn't change. I looked down at the water. It was dark and still like ink. The oar made ripples, but they didn't go anywhere. They spread out in a circle, then vanished, as if the lake didn't want to hold on to anything. I looked up at the shoreline again. It was still there. I rowed harder, pushing with everything I had. My arms burned. My breath came in short bursts. I felt my muscles strain, my shoulders tighten. The boat didn't move. I stopped and rested my hands on the oar, staring at the shore like it was a puzzle I was supposed to solve. That's when I heard Hal's voice. "Keep going," he said from the dock, calm and steady. "Don't stop." I looked toward him. He was standing there, watching me like he was watching a fish that wouldn't bite. "Hal," I called, "it's not moving. I'm rowing and it's not." He held up a hand. "Just keep rowing." I tried again. I pushed harder and the oar cut through the water with a soft, wet sound. My muscles screamed. My heart thudded in my chest. But the boat stayed where it was, as if it was nailed to the lake. The sun started to rise and the light changed the color of the water. It went from dark to a deep, dull blue. The trees along the shore looked like silhouettes. Everything felt unreal, like the world had been paused. I kept rowing. I don't know how long I stayed out there. I lost track of time. The only thing I could hear was my own breathing and the soft splash of the oar. The lake didn't answer. It didn't move. It didn't react. And then slowly, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The lake wasn't just still. It was watching. I don't mean that in a spooky way like the water had eyes. I mean it felt like the lake knew I was there, like it was aware of me in a way that didn't belong to nature. It was a presence, quiet and heavy, that pressed against my skin. I stopped rowing for a moment. The boat stayed in place. The oar hung over the water like a question. I looked toward the dock again. Hal was still there, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, like he was staring at something in the distance that I couldn't see. I called out again, "Hal, what is this? Why won't it move?" He finally turned his head. His eyes were dull, tired, and something else, like he'd seen too much. "It's the lake," he said quietly. "It doesn't drift." I swallowed hard, but why? Hal's face didn't change, because it doesn't want to. I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. I didn't like the way he said it. It sounded like he was talking about a person. I tried to make a joke, something to lighten the mood, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight. My hands were shaking on the oar. Hal walked to the edge of the dock and leaned on the railing. He looked down at the water like he was looking at something he couldn't touch. "Some people think it's the bottom," he said. "They think there's something holding the boats. They think it's rocks or weeds or some kind of trap." He shook his head slowly. "It's not. The lake isn't holding the boats. The boats are holding the lake." I stared at him, not sure what that meant. He continued, his voice soft, almost gentle. "You ever heard the story about the men who tried to leave?" I shook my head. "They rowed all night," he said. "They didn't stop. They were scared. They were mad. They thought if they kept going, the lake would let them." He paused, and I felt the air grow heavier. "They didn't make it." My heart jumped. "What do you mean?" Hal's eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw something like fear in them. Not his fear, not the kind he carried every day. This was deeper. "They stayed in the same spot," he said. "All night. They kept rowing until their arms gave out. They kept rowing until the sun came up, and they still didn't move." He took a breath, as if he was forcing himself to continue. "And when they stopped, they looked up." I waited, my stomach twisting. "They weren't alone," he said. "There were boats around them, dozens of boats, all of them still, all of them full of people." He looked away, like he couldn't bear to remember it. "And the people, they were all staring at them." I felt my skin tighten. "What happened to them?" Hal's voice was almost a whisper. "They never left." I sat in the boat, my hands still on the oar, staring at the water like it was suddenly full of hidden shapes. The lake felt bigger now, deeper, like it had a bottom that didn't end. The calm surface looked like a mask. I looked back at Hal. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He sighed a long, tired sound. "Because you're new, because you don't know the rules yet." I frowned. "What rules?" Hal pointed at the lake, and his finger trembled slightly. "You don't fight it," he said. "You don't try to force it. You don't try to win." I stared at him. "Then what do you do?" He looked at me for a long time, and I could tell he was deciding whether to tell me the truth or spare me. Finally, he spoke. "You listen." I didn't understand. Listen to what? Hal's eyes went distant again, like he was remembering something he wished he could forget. "Listen to the lake," he said. "It doesn't drift, but it talks." I laughed once, but it sounded hollow. "A lake talks." Hal didn't smile, not with words. He leaned closer. "It talks with the feeling you get when you're out there, the feeling that you're not alone, the feeling that something is waiting." I swallowed. "Waiting for what?" Hal looked down at the water. "For you to stop rowing." The words hit me like a cold splash. I felt my heart pound. I looked at the oar in my hands and realized I had been holding it too tightly. My knuckles were white. I stared at the water again. The lake was calm, but now it didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a surface hiding something beneath. "Hal," I said softly, "I want to go back." He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded once like he understood. "All right," he said, "but you do it the right way." I stared at him. "What's the right way?" He pointed to the oar. "Put it down." I hesitated. "What?" I asked. "Put the oar down," he repeated. "Let it float." My mind raced. If I do that, the boat will just sit there. Hal's eyes were steady. "Yes, that's the point." I looked at the lake and I realized the truth of it. The lake didn't want to be pushed. It didn't want to be forced. It wanted you to stop fighting it. I lowered the oar into the water. It floated, barely moving, like it was too tired to do anything. I sat in the boat and waited. The silence was thick. My heart hammered in my chest. The lake didn't move. The boat didn't drift. But something else happened. I heard it. Not a voice, not a sound. A feeling. Like a pressure against the back of my mind, soft and patient. Like the lake was leaning in, waiting for me to understand. I sat there, and I realized that the lake wasn't just a place. It was a trap. A slow one. A quiet one. And it had been waiting for me long before I ever arrived. When the sun rose fully, the lake still didn't drift. The boat still didn't move. The water still held its surface like a mask. And I understood with a cold certainty that if I ever wanted to leave, I would have to stop fighting the lake. I would have to listen. And I would have to hope that the lake was willing to let me go. Because if it was, then I would become another boat. Another story. Another warning. Left floating on a lake that never drifts. The fog didn't arrive like weather. It arrived like a decision. One moment the lake was clear, the trees sharp against the sky, the water reflecting everything like a mirror. The next moment, it was like someone had pulled a thick sheet across the surface, hiding the world behind it. The air grew colder, and the smell changed. It was no longer fresh water and wet wood. It became heavy like old paper left in a damp room. I was still in the boat, sitting with the oar across my lap, staring at the shore and trying to convince myself that the lake was just being strange. I told myself it was fog, that fog happens, that I'd seen it before in the mornings when the air is cold and the water is warmer. But this fog was different. It didn't move like fog should. It didn't drift. It didn't roll in from the trees or the open water. It just appeared thick and sudden, as if the lake had decided to cover itself. The edges of the fog were sharp, not soft. It cut the world into pieces. Beyond the boat, everything vanished. I looked at the shoreline and couldn't see it. I looked at the dock and couldn't see it. The only thing I could see was the boat and the water directly under it. The lake felt smaller now, like the fog had pressed the world closer. I tried to row back, but the oar felt heavier, like it was moving through thick syrup. The boat didn't drift. It didn't move at all. The fog made the air feel thick, like it was slowing down time. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the water's quiet, soft sound as it held the boat in place. Then I heard something else. A hum. Not loud, not sharp. Just a low, steady vibration that seemed to come from the water itself. It wasn't like a motor or a machine. It was deeper, like the lake was alive in a way I didn't understand. I froze, listening. The hum continued, steady and calm, like someone was holding a note and refusing to let it end. It felt like it was inside my chest, not outside. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. I told myself my ears were tired, that my mind was playing tricks after all the stories Hal told me. But the hum wasn't the only thing. Under the fog, I heard voices. Soft voices. Far away, like someone speaking underwater. Not words I could understand at first, just the sound of human voices. Distant and muffled, like a radio turned down too low. Then the voices changed. They began to sound like they were calling. My name. Not loud, not clear, but there, just under the surface of the hum. Hey, you. I jerked my head around, expecting to see someone in a boat, someone hiding behind the fog. But there was nothing. Only fog and water and the boat holding still. The voice came again. Hey, you over here. It sounded like it was coming from the lake itself, like the water was speaking through the fog. The sound made my skin prickle. I felt cold seep into my bones. I swallowed, my throat dry. Hello, I called out because I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't sure if I was speaking to a person or to the lake. My voice sounded wrong in the fog. It seemed to get swallowed, like the fog absorbed it. The voices continued. Over here. Come closer. Don't be scared. The words were soft. They were gentle, like someone trying to calm a child. That was the worst part. It wasn't threatening. It was inviting. It made my stomach twist. I stared into the fog, trying to see if there was anything in it. Anything at all. But it was like staring into a wall. The fog didn't let my eyes go past it. It held the world back like a curtain. I tried to row again. The oar moved, but the boat didn't. It felt like I was pushing against something invisible, something that didn't want me to leave. My arms burned, but the boat stayed in place. The hum grew louder. The voices became clearer. They sounded like they were right beneath the surface, as if someone was speaking from under the water. Their words were still soft, but I could understand them now. Don't fight it. Just let it take you. Come on, it's okay. My heart thumped. I looked down at the water, expecting to see ripples or movement, but the surface was calm. It looked like glass. I leaned closer, staring at the water as if I could see through it. The fog made everything look different, like the lake was hiding its true shape. The voices spoke again, and this time I heard something that made my stomach drop. It wasn't just one voice. It was many. A chorus. They were speaking at once, overlapping, but still somehow calm. It sounded like a group of people who were all trying to say the same thing at the same time. Stop rowing. Let go. Come closer. The words weren't angry. They weren't desperate. They were patient, like they had been waiting for me for a long time. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. I tried to remind myself that the lake was just water, that fog was just fog, that my mind was tired and scared. But then I heard a sound that wasn't a voice. A splash. Not a loud splash, a small one, like something had moved under the water just once, a gentle disturbance. I looked down. The water was calm, but there was a ripple spreading outward, slow and smooth. It didn't break the surface like a normal ripple. It moved like something beneath the water was pushing up, trying to reach the surface without breaking it. The ripple moved toward the boat. My heart started to race. I felt my hands shake on the oar. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped. The fog was thick. The boat wouldn't move. The voices were calling. The hum was in my bones. I looked toward the dock, hoping to see Hal, hoping he would be there to tell me it was okay. But I couldn't see anything. The fog swallowed the dock. I shouted Hal. My voice barely made it through the fog. It sounded weak, like it didn't belong in the world. The voices responded. Not with words this time. With a sound like laughter. Soft laughter, quiet and distant, like someone laughing underwater. I felt my skin crawl. The ripple moved closer. I leaned over the edge of the boat and stared down into the water. The fog made the water look like a dark, endless pit. I could barely see a few inches down, but it felt like it went on forever. I waited for something to appear. Something to rise. Something to show itself. But nothing did. Only the ripple. The hum. The voices. And the feeling that the lake was waiting. I sat back up and tried to breathe slowly. I told myself I was safe. I told myself the lake was just water. I told myself it couldn't hurt me. But the lake didn't feel like water anymore. It felt like a living thing. A patient thing. A thing that had been waiting for me to arrive. The voices spoke again, and this time they sounded closer, like they were right under the boat. "Come on," they whispered. "It's time." I stared at the fog. My mind tried to make sense of it. It tried to find logic. It tried to find a way out. But the fog didn't move. The boat didn't move. The voices didn't stop. I felt a strange, quiet fear settle over me. Not the kind of fear that makes you run. The kind that makes you freeze, because running feels like admitting the lake has power over you. I thought about the men Hal told me about. The ones who rode all night and never moved. The ones who saw the boats full of people staring at them. I thought about the feeling of being watched. I thought about the lake being patient. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. The voices weren't calling from the shore. They weren't calling from a boat. They were calling from below. They were calling from the lake itself. I felt the boat shift slightly, like it was responding to the voices. It wasn't moving forward or backward. It was just adjusting, like it was settling into place. I gripped the oar tighter, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold it steady. The hum grew louder. The voices became clearer. They were not just calling my name now. They were speaking like they knew me. "Don't be scared," they said. "Come closer. We've been waiting." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to block it out. When I opened them again, the fog looked even thicker. The lake looked even darker. I felt something brush the bottom of the boat. A gentle touch, like a hand. I froze. The touch came again, slow and careful. It didn't feel like an attack. It felt like something testing me, seeing if I would fight or if I would accept. The voices whispered in my ears, soft as a lullaby. "Just let go." My mind screamed at me to row, to fight, to do something. But my body felt heavy. My arms felt weak. The fog made everything feel like it was underwater. I didn't know how long I sat there. Minutes maybe, hours. Time didn't feel real. The hum kept going. The voices kept calling. And the lake stayed still, like it was waiting for me to make the choice. To stop rowing. To let go. To become part of it. I didn't know if I could. But I knew, deep down, that the lake was not going to let me leave easily. Not now. Not after it had finally found me. I didn't plan on going under the water at all. I was just sitting in the boat, staring into the fog, trying to make sense of the voices, and the hum and the way the lake felt like it was pressing against my skin. I kept telling myself it was just fear, that my mind was playing tricks, that the lake was nothing but water. But the lake had a way of turning nothing into something. The fog was thick and the boat wouldn't move. The voices had stopped calling my name, but they still whispered in the air, like the fog was holding them. The hum was still there, deep and steady, like a pulse. I was tired, not just physically, but mentally. The kind of tired that makes your thoughts slow down, makes your brain feel heavy, like it's full of wet cloth. I looked down at the water. It was dark and calm. The surface looked smooth, like a sheet of glass, but something about it felt wrong. The fog made it hard to tell where the lake ended and the sky began. I stared into the water for a long time, and then I saw something. A small object just beneath the surface. It looked like a piece of cloth, floating slowly, as if it was moving in its own direction. I leaned closer. It wasn't cloth. It was a shoe. An old shoe, worn and dirty. The kind of shoe someone would wear every day until it fell apart. It looked like it had been underwater for a long time. I stared at it, my heart thumping. The sight of it made my stomach turn. I knew what it meant. I knew there were missing people. I knew the stories. I knew what Hal had said about the men who never left. But seeing a shoe in the water, made it feel real. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to accept it. But the lake didn't care what I wanted. The shoe drifted slowly, almost gently, as if the water was carrying it toward the boat. It didn't splash. It didn't move quickly. It just glided. I reached out with my hand, but I didn't touch it. The water felt cold through the boat, as if it was trying to seep in. The shoe disappeared onto the surface. I felt a sudden urge to look deeper, to see what else was down there. My mind told me it was stupid. It told me to row back. It told me to leave. But my body moved anyway. I stood up in the boat, my legs shaking, and I leaned over the edge. The fog made the world look like a painting that had been smeared. I couldn't see the shore. I couldn't see the dock. I couldn't see anything but the water and the fog and the boat. The water looked dark, but I could see a faint light beneath the surface. Not bright, but enough to make shapes visible. It looked like something was glowing down there. I felt my chest tighten. The hum grew louder, like it was responding to my movement. The lake seemed to recognize that I was looking. I took a deep breath and told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself it was just an old lake, just a deep lake, just a place where things sank and got lost. Then I did something I didn't expect. I climbed out of the boat. I know how that sounds. It sounds crazy. It sounds like something someone would do in a horror movie. But in that moment, my fear had a strange way of turning into something else. A curiosity, a need, a feeling that if I didn't look, I would never know. And if I never knew, I would always be stuck with the uncertainty. So I climbed out. The water was cold, shocking cold. It hit my legs and made me gasp. The lake pulled at me gently, like it wanted me to sink, but it wasn't violent. It wasn't like drowning. It was like being invited into a dark place. I took another step. The water rose to my waist. The fog pressed in around me. The hum vibrated through the water, through my body, into my bones. I felt the lake beneath my feet, soft and muddy. The bottom was not solid. It felt like walking on wet sand. I kept going. The water rose to my chest. My breathing got harder. My heart pounded. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I told myself to stop. I told myself to turn back. But something pulled me forward. Not physically, not with force, but with a feeling, a gentle tug at the inside of my mind, like the lake was calling me from below. I reached down into the water. My hand touched something. It was hard, not rock hard, but solid, like a box. I pulled it up slowly, my fingers closing around it. The water made it slippery. The fog made it feel like I was holding something that didn't belong in my world. When I brought it up to the surface, I saw what it was. A metal container, old and rusted. The kind of container you might use to keep small things safe. It was covered in algae and the rust had eaten into the metal, but it was still intact. I held it in my hands and stared at it. The hum grew louder. The fog seemed to tighten around me. The lake felt like it was holding its breath. I opened the container. Inside there were papers. Old papers, yellowed with age. The kind of paper that becomes fragile when you touch it. The kind of paper that feels like it could crumble into dust if you breathe too hard. I pulled out the first sheet. It was a journal. A real journal. A book with a cover that had been water damaged but was still readable. The pages were filled with handwriting. I stared at it, my mind racing. I didn't know whose journal it was. I didn't know how long it had been down there. I didn't know what I was holding. But I felt something deep inside me, like the lake had given me a gift and a warning at the same time. I opened the journal. The handwriting was neat, careful. It didn't look like the writing of someone who was scared. It looked like the writing of someone who was calm, who had planned this, who had written it down like a story. The first page had a date from years ago. I read it slowly, because my mind couldn't process it all at once. And then I saw the words that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just a journal. It was a record of missing people, a list, names, dates, descriptions. I read one name and my heart stopped. It was a name I recognized, a name I had seen on a missing person poster in town. I read another missing person. The journal was full of them. It was like someone had been keeping track of the people who vanished. And then I turned the page. My hands shook. The handwriting changed. It was the same style, but the tone was different. It felt more personal, more direct. The words on the page were not about other people. They were about me. I stared at the page, unable to breathe. The journal had a section labeled, "The New One." Under it, there was a paragraph written like a note to someone. I read it slowly, my eyes moving over each word like I was trying to make it disappear. The paragraph described me, not in a vague way, in a specific way. It described the way I looked when I was scared. It described the way I sat in the boat. It described the way I stared into the fog. It described the exact moment I climbed out of the boat. It described my fear. It described my thoughts. It described the lake. And then it said something that made my blood run cold. It said, "He will come down. He will find the container. He will read the journal. He will think he is safe because he knows the story now. But the lake does not let people leave after they know." My hands tightened around the journal. My mouth went dry. I looked up at the fog. I looked at the water. I looked at the boat, floating there, empty now, like it had been waiting for me to leave it. The hum was louder than ever. The fog was thicker. The lake felt closer, like it was leaning toward me. I read another line. It said, "He will try to return to the shore. He will try to swim, but the lake will guide him. The lake will show him the way, and the way will not lead to land." My heart hammered in my chest. My mind screamed at me to get out of the water, to run, to swim, to do anything. But my legs felt heavy. The water felt like it was holding me, not tightly, but gently, like a hand guiding me. I looked at the journal again, desperate for something else, something that would tell me I could still leave. The next line was written in a different ink, darker, as if someone had written it later. It said, "Don't fight it, don't fight the lake. The lake wants you. The lake has always wanted you." I felt my breath catch. I looked around, trying to find the shore, trying to find the dock, trying to find anything that looked like a way out. But the fog was too thick. The lake was too still. The hum filled my ears. The water around me felt like it was moving, even though I couldn't see it, like something was circling me, slowly, patiently. I realized then what the journal was. It wasn't just a record. It was a trap, a way to make you think you had control, a way to make you believe you could understand the lake, a way to make you feel safe. But the lake didn't want you to feel safe. It wanted you to belong, to be part of it. I tried to stand up, to swim, to move, but my body felt heavy, like it was being pulled down. The fog pressed in. The hum rose. And the lake seemed to whisper, just under the surface, like it was speaking through the water itself. "Come closer," it said. "Come home." I held the journal tight, my fingers digging into the wet pages. My heart raced. My mind tried to fight, but it felt like the lake was already inside me, like it had been waiting for this moment all along. I didn't know if I could escape. I didn't know if I could leave the lake behind. All I knew was that the journal had predicted this, and now I was living it. That's the first thing I want to say, because it's the truth. When the lake had me, I didn't think it would let me go. I thought I was done. I thought the fog and the hum and the voices were the last things I'd ever hear. I thought the water would close over me like a lid. But I got out. Not because I was strong, not because I was brave, not because I was smart. I got out because the lake, for some reason, decided to let me. I still don't know why. I remember the moment I realized I could move. It was like waking up from a dream that you didn't know you were having. The fog was still thick, the water still cold, but something inside me shifted. My body stopped feeling heavy. The pressure eased. The hum softened. The voices were still there, but they sounded farther away, like they were fading into the distance. I kicked my legs, I swam. Not fast, not with power, just enough to keep moving. The water felt different now. It didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a body of water again, like something I could survive. I kept swimming until my fingers touched something solid. Mud, the lake bottom, the ground. I stood up, gasping for air. My lungs burned. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath for hours. I looked around. The fog was still thick, but I could see the outline of trees. The shoreline was close. I could see the dock in the distance, a dark shape against the fog. I stumbled forward, my legs weak. I dragged myself out of the water and onto the muddy ground. I fell forward and lay there for a moment, my face in the dirt, my body shaking. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just lay there and listened. The lake was quiet. That was the strangest part. After all the noise, after all the hum and the voices, the lake was suddenly silent. It didn't feel peaceful. It felt like it was holding its breath, like it was waiting. I got up slowly. My legs trembled. My clothes were heavy with water. My skin was cold and numb. The fog pressed in around me, and I felt like I was walking through a dream. I looked back at the lake. It looked normal. It looked like a lake. The surface was smooth. The water was dark. The fog sat on top like a blanket. But I knew it wasn't normal. I knew what was under it. I knew what it wanted. I walked toward the dock, my footsteps soft in the mud. The fog made everything look blurred, like I was walking through a memory. The dock got closer. The trees got clearer. The air felt warmer. When I reached the dock, I saw Hal standing there. He wasn't moving. He was just standing, watching me. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were heavy, like he'd been waiting. "Did you make it?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. My throat was too tight. I just stared at him. He stepped forward slowly. "You shouldn't have gone in." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my mind. I didn't mean to. Hal looked at me like he didn't believe me, but he didn't argue. He reached out and put a hand on my shoulder. His hand was cold. Not the cold of the air, the cold of something else. He helped me to my feet. I looked at the lake again. The fog was still there. The surface was still smooth. The water still looked calm. But I could feel it, like a weight on my chest, like a memory that wouldn't leave. I walked away from the dock with Hal behind me. My body moved, but my mind stayed behind in the lake. I could still hear the hum, faintly, like a distant sound in a dream. I could still hear the voices, quiet and soft, like they were calling from far away. When we reached the parking area, Hal handed me a towel and a dry jacket. "You need to go home," he said. I nodded, but my mind was spinning. What happens now? Hal didn't answer right away. He stared at the lake like he was trying to read something in it. Finally, he said, "You leave. You don't come back." I swallowed. What if I can't stop thinking about it? Hal's eyes met mine. "Then you'll know what it means." I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand, but I nodded anyway. I got into my truck and started the engine. The sound felt loud in the quiet morning. The fog was still thick, and the world outside looked like it was covered in a blanket. As I drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, watching the lake fade behind me. It didn't fade the way it should. It didn't shrink and disappear into the distance. It stayed there like a dark stain on the world. I kept driving, but the lake stayed in my mind. It followed me like a thought I couldn't shake. Every time I blinked, I saw the fog. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the hum. When I got home, I went straight to the shower. The water was hot and it felt like a relief. The steam filled the bathroom and I stood there, letting the heat wash over me. But even in the warm water, I could feel the cold of the lake. Even in the steam, I could feel the fog. I tried to sleep that night, but my mind kept returning to the water. I kept seeing the journal. I kept hearing the voices. I kept feeling the pull of the lake. I tried to tell myself it was over. I tried to tell myself I was safe. I tried to tell myself it was just a story. But the lake didn't stop following me. The next day, I woke up with a strange feeling in my mouth, like I had been breathing through water. I went to the kitchen to get coffee, and I noticed something on the counter. A small wet pebble. It wasn't from my house. It wasn't from the road. It was the kind of pebble you find by a lake, smooth, dark, shaped by water. I picked it up and my fingers trembled. I looked around the kitchen, feeling like someone was watching me. Then I saw it. On the floor near the sink was a small piece of algae, green, slimy, like it had been pulled from the water and left there. I didn't know how it got there. I didn't know why it was there. But I knew. The lake was still with me. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. Maybe I had picked up the pebble on the road. Maybe the algae was from a plant I had in the house. Maybe I was imagining things. But the feeling in my chest didn't lie. The lake was still inside me. That night I went to bed early. I was exhausted physically and mentally. I wanted to sleep. I wanted to forget. But sleep didn't come easily. When I closed my eyes, I saw the fog. I heard the hum. I heard the voices. And I felt the water around me, pulling gently like a hand on my shoulder. I woke up in the middle of the night sweating. The room was dark. The air was still. But I could hear something. A soft sound like someone humming. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. The humming was coming from the bathroom. I got up and walked to the bathroom door. The sound was clearer now, like it was right next to me. I opened the door. The bathroom was empty, but the bathtub was filled with water. Not tap water, lake water, dark and still. The surface was smooth like glass. The fog wasn't in the room, but I could feel it in the air. The hum was louder. The voices were closer. I stepped back, my hands shaking. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to stop it. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape. But the lake had followed me, quietly, like a memory that refuses to fade. I stood there, staring at the water in the bathtub, and I realized something I didn't want to admit. The lake wasn't just a place. It was a part of me now. And no matter how far I ran, no matter how hard I tried to forget, it would always be there. Waiting, humming, calling, quietly, like a memory that refuses to fade. I used to think it came with a sound, a crash, a shout, a final gasp, something that marked the end like a door slamming shut. But that was before I worked on the case, before I learned that death can be quiet. So quiet, in fact, that you might not even notice it until it's too late. It started like most cold cases do, a file that nobody wanted, a stack of paperwork shoved into a cabinet and forgotten, a name that didn't matter anymore, a story that had been left to rot. The first time I saw the file, I thought it was just another night shift. I was retired then. My badge was gone. My uniform was folded in a box in the attic. My gun was locked away, collecting dust. I was supposed to be done with it all, supposed to be enjoying the quiet. But quiet has a way of dragging you back. The case came to me through an old colleague, a man named Harper. He didn't call me for help. He called me because he needed someone to talk to who would understand. He said the new officer on the case was nervous. He said the family was angry. He said the media was circling like vultures. He said the scene didn't make sense. And then he said the words that made my skin go cold. They were asleep when they died. I remember that line like it was spoken in the same room I'm in right now. Asleep when they died. It sounded like something from a horror movie. But it wasn't a movie, it was real. Harper handed me the file and watched my face carefully, like he expected me to laugh or shake my head, like he expected me to tell him it was impossible. I didn't say anything. I just opened the file. The first case was from 3 years earlier. A woman named Leela Monroe, 34 years old, found in her bed. The room was tidy, the bed was made, the window was closed, the lights were off. Her husband had called it in. He said he woke up and she was just gone. He said she looked peaceful. He said he thought she was sleeping. The autopsy report said she died of natural causes. No signs of trauma. No poison. No struggle. No reason. But the detective who originally worked the case wrote a note in the margins. Something about the face. That was all. Something about the face. The next case was worse. A man named Daniel Pierce, 61 years old, found in his bed on his side with his arm curled around his pillow like he was holding onto it for comfort. The room was neat. The TV was still on, but the volume was low as if he'd fallen asleep watching it. His daughter called it in. She said she came in to check on him, and he was just still. The autopsy report said heart failure. But again, the detective wrote a note. Eyes open. That was the note. Eyes open. It wasn't just the fact that they died in their sleep. It was how they looked when they were found. Like they were watching something. Like they were waiting. The third case was the one that made the file stick in my mind. A young woman named Mia Harris, 25 years old, found in her bed face down like she'd fallen asleep on her stomach. The room was cold. The curtains were drawn. The air smelled faintly of perfume. Her roommate called it in. She said Mia had been acting strange for weeks. She said Mia kept talking about dreams that weren't dreams. She said Mia had started writing in a journal. The journal was in the file. I remember flipping through it and feeling like my hands were suddenly too cold to hold paper. Mia's handwriting was neat. Her words were simple, but there was something off about them, like she was writing for someone else. The last entry was the one that made me pause. It said, "I think I'm falling asleep while awake." I read that line 3 times. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't stop reading. The detective's note for Mia's case was longer than the others. Sleep position doesn't match time of death. Room smelled like old perfume. No signs of forced entry. No explanation. I don't like this. The note ended with a line that made my stomach twist. I think she was already asleep when she died. That was the first time I realized what the pattern was. The victims weren't just dying in their sleep. They were dying while already asleep. Like they had been trapped in a sleep they couldn't wake up from. I kept reading. There were more cases, not many, 5 in total, all of them in the same city, all of them within a 3-year span, all of them found in bed alone with no signs of struggle. All of them described as peaceful. All of them described as asleep. But the details were what made the cases strange. The perfume, the open eyes, the neat rooms, the calm, the feeling that something was off. Harper told me the new case had just been reported. A man named Richard Vance, 47 years old, found in his bed by his sister. The room was clean. The window was locked. The lights were off. The air was still. The sister said he looked like he was sleeping. She said she didn't want to wake him. She said she touched his shoulder and he didn't move. The autopsy report wasn't back yet. Harper said the detective on the case wanted me to look at it. He said he wanted someone who could see the pattern, someone who could connect the dots. I told him I didn't want to. I told him I was retired. I told him I didn't want to go back to the darkness. But Harper didn't listen. He handed me the file, and I opened it. The first thing I noticed was the smell. I know that sounds strange. A file can't smell. But when I opened the folder, it felt like the air in the room changed. Like someone had opened a window. Like something old and floral had drifted in. It was the same perfume. The same smell that had been noted in Mia Harris's room. The same smell that had been written in the margins of the other cases. Old perfume. Like a woman who had been wearing it for years. Like something that had been left behind. I read through Richard Vance's file, and the details matched. No signs of trauma. No poison. No forced entry. No explanation. But the detective's note was different. It wasn't about the face or the eyes. It was about the bed. The sheets are clean, but the bed looks used, like someone was lying in it, but no one was there. That line stayed with me. No one was there. And yet the bed looked used, like someone had been in it, like someone had been there with the victim. I started thinking about the victims, about the way they were found, about the calmness, about the perfume, about the feeling that they were waiting for something. I wondered if they had been sleeping for a long time before they died. I wondered if they had been dreaming. I wondered if they had been trapped in a dream they couldn't escape. The idea felt ridiculous, but the evidence was there. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something else. The victims didn't just die. They were taken in their sleep, taken by something that didn't leave a mark, taken by something that didn't make a sound. And the most terrifying part was this. The victims didn't fight. They didn't struggle. They didn't even wake up. They just stayed there in their beds, like they had always been there, like they had been waiting for the end. I started going through the files again, looking for anything I missed. I looked at the dates. I looked at the locations. I looked at the times. The cases were spread out, but they were close enough to suggest a pattern. The victims were all alone. The victims were all found in the same way. The victims were all described as peaceful. The victims were all described as asleep. But there was one detail that I hadn't noticed before. The victims all lived near the same part of the city. A neighborhood that had once been full of old houses. A neighborhood that had been built over a lake a long time ago. A lake that had been drained. A lake that had been forgotten. I remember the lake. I remember the stories. I remember the old fishermen who used to tell tales about a lake that never drifted. A lake that hummed. A lake that called. A lake that took. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore the connection. The lake had been drained years ago. The land had been built over. The houses had been built on top of it. But the water was still there, under the ground. And the story said the lake never forgot. The lake never let go. I put the file down and stared at the wall. I thought about the victims. I thought about the perfume. I thought about the feeling of calm. I thought about the idea of falling asleep while awake. I thought about the lake. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. The victims weren't dying in their sleep. They were dying in a place that wasn't sleep. They were dying in a different kind of rest. A rest that the lake gave them. A rest that the lake wanted. And the lake didn't care if they woke up. Because once you were in it, you were already gone. I closed the file. I sat in the dark. And I listened, because even in the quiet, I could hear it. A soft hum, a gentle whisper, like someone calling my name from beneath the surface. And I knew, with a certainty that I didn't want, that the case wasn't over. It had never been over. It was only beginning. It found me, not in a supernatural way, not like a sign in the sky or a voice in the wind. It found me the way a loose thread finds your fingers, and before you know it, you've pulled the whole sweater apart. I was sitting in my office, staring at the file, trying to make sense of the pattern. The victims, the beds, the perfume, the calm, the way the cases all seemed to circle back to the same neighborhood. I'd been retired for a while. I'd been trying to let the quiet settle into me like a blanket, but the file didn't let me sleep. It didn't let me forget. It followed me into my dreams like a shadow that refused to be shaken. That night, I was going through the paperwork again, and I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A name. Not a victim's name. A clinic. It was mentioned in one of the reports, almost like an afterthought. A place where a victim had once gone for help. The report said the victim had been suffering from insomnia. It said the victim had been referred to a sleep clinic. It said the victim had been given a therapy called peaceful sleep. I remember the words because they sounded like something from a brochure. Something you'd see on a clean website with soft blue colors and smiling faces. Peaceful sleep therapy. The name itself sounded harmless, but the way it was written in the report made it feel like a warning. I looked up the clinic's name in the old city directory. It wasn't there. Not in the current one, not in the archives, not in the records. It was like the clinic had never existed. But the report said it did, and the victim's family said it did. So I did what I always did when I needed answers. I went to the place. The clinic was on a side street, hidden behind a row of shops that looked like they had been there forever. The building was old, with cracked paint and a faded sign that was barely readable. I stood outside for a long time, just looking at it. There was something about the place that felt wrong. Not in a dramatic, spooky way. In a quiet, practical way. Like a building that had been waiting for someone to notice it. I pushed the door open. The air inside was cool, like it had been sealed for a long time. The waiting room was empty. The chairs were lined up neatly. The reception desk was clean. There was a small stack of pamphlets on a table, but the pages were blank. I walked to the desk and saw a folder. It was labeled with the clinic's name. Peaceful Sleep Therapy. My hand shook as I opened it. The first thing I saw was a list of names. Patients, dates, treatment times. The names matched some of the victims. The names I had been staring at for weeks. I felt a chill run down my spine. The folder contained more than names, though. It contained notes. Short notes, clinical notes, written in the calm, professional handwriting of someone who had seen too many patients to be surprised by anything. The notes described the therapy. The notes described the procedure. They described a process of relaxation, of breathing, of letting go. They described something that sounded like hypnosis. They described a sleep so deep it was described as peaceful. And then, in the margins, there were notes that didn't belong in a medical file. The handwriting changed. It became shaky. It became urgent. It said things like, "They don't wake. They sleep forever. They are calm. They are happy." The notes didn't say it outright, but the meaning was clear. The therapy wasn't just making them sleep. It was keeping them asleep. It was a permanent sleep. I read on. There were descriptions of patients who had come in with insomnia, anxiety, nightmares. There were notes about patients who had been restless, who had been afraid. And then there were the final notes, the ones that made my stomach turn. They are smiling. They are at peace. They are ready. Ready for what? The file didn't say. But I knew. I knew because of the victims. Because of the way they had been found. Because of the calm on their faces. Because of the perfume. Because of the feeling that they had been waiting for something. I closed the folder and sat down in one of the chairs. I stared at the empty waiting room and tried to make sense of it. The clinic had treated people who were suffering. People who couldn't sleep. People who were scared. And the therapy had worked. It had worked too well. It had worked in a way that made the patients never wake up again. I stood up and walked deeper into the building. The hallway was narrow. The walls were painted a pale color that made the air feel colder. The lights were dim. There was a faint hum, like an old machine that was still running. I found a door marked treatment room. The handle was cold when I touched it. I opened the door. The room was small. There was a bed in the center, a chair beside it, a small machine with dials and a screen, a single lamp that cast a soft light over the bed. The bed looked like it had been used recently. The sheets were smooth, as if someone had just made them. The pillow was indented, like a head had been resting there. I stepped closer. The air smelled faintly of perfume. Old perfume. The same smell that had been in the victims' rooms. I felt like I was being watched. I told myself it was just the building, just my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I reached out and touched the bed. The fabric was warm. Not just warm like a room warmed by sunlight. Warm like a body had been there. Like someone had just gotten up. But the room was empty. The clinic was empty. The building was quiet. And yet the bed was warm. I stepped back, my heart pounding. I turned to leave. That's when I saw the mirror. It was hanging on the wall opposite the bed. It was old with a tarnished frame. The glass was slightly cloudy. I looked into it, and I saw myself. I saw my own face. But something was wrong. My eyes looked tired. Too tired. Like I hadn't slept in days. Like I had been awake for too long. I blinked. The image in the mirror didn't change. It stayed. I looked away. I looked back. My face was still there. But now I noticed something else. The reflection wasn't just showing me. It was showing the room behind me. And in the room behind me, I saw a figure. A person. Sitting on the bed. Watching me. I turned around quickly. The bed was empty. The room was empty. I looked back at the mirror. The figure was still there. It was sitting in the bed, just like the victims had been. It was calm. It was still. It was asleep. I stared at it frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I felt like my body had stopped working. And then the figure in the mirror turned its head. Not toward me. Toward the door. Toward the hallway. Toward the waiting room. As if it was waiting for someone. As if it was waiting for me. The mirror fogged slightly, like breath on glass. And then in the fog, words appeared. Not written with a pen. Not carved into the glass. Just there. Like the mirror itself was speaking. Peaceful sleep. The words faded. The mirror cleared. The room was empty again. I left the clinic quickly, my hands shaking. I didn't look back. When I got outside, the air felt warmer. The city was alive. Cars passed by, people walked. The world continued, unaware of the building hidden on the side street. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been in a place that shouldn't exist. A place that had been waiting. A place that had been keeping people asleep. a place that had been making sure they never woke up. I went home that night and locked my door. I tried to tell myself it was just a clinic, just an old building, just a strange file. But I couldn't stop thinking about the bed, the warm bed, the empty room, the mirror, the figure in the bed, and the words, peaceful sleep. I lay in my own bed, staring at the ceiling. I listened to the quiet. I tried to breathe slowly. I tried to calm my mind. But the more I tried, the more I felt the weight of sleep pressing down on me. Not the kind of sleep you get when you're tired. The kind of sleep that comes when you've been waiting for it. The kind of sleep that feels like a hand on your shoulder. Like a whisper in your ear. Like a lullaby you can't stop hearing. I closed my eyes. Just for a moment. Just to rest. But when I opened them again, I saw something on my bedside table. A small pamphlet. Blank pages. But the cover was familiar. Peaceful Sleep Therapy. I didn't remember picking it up. I didn't remember bringing it home. And yet it was there. As if it had always been there. As if it had been waiting for me. I picked it up with trembling hands. I stared at the cover. And I realized with a cold certainty that the clinic wasn't finished with me. It had found me. It had always been looking for someone. And now it had. Now it was my turn to learn what peaceful sleep really meant. But once you see a pattern, it starts to feel like a trap, like a line drawn in the sand, like something that wants you to step into it. The cases had been connected for weeks now. Victims found in beds, in their homes, in hotel rooms, in abandoned apartments, all of them asleep, all of them calm, all of them wearing that same look, like they had finally stopped fighting something they couldn't beat. I had been retired for years. I had been trying to live a quiet life, but this case had dragged me back. It was too neat, too consistent, too intentional. The victims didn't look like they had been murdered. They looked like they had been put to bed. The first time I saw it, I thought it was mercy. The second time, I thought it was coincidence. The third time, I knew someone was doing it on purpose. And then the fourth time, when the body was found in a motel room that didn't exist on any map, I realized the killer wasn't just putting people to sleep. He was creating a world where sleep was the only reality. The file had led me to a pattern, a route, a series of locations that didn't make sense until you realized they all connected to one thing. The killer moved like someone who knew the city better than anyone, like someone who had lived here long enough to know the hidden roads, the empty lots, the places that people forgot. And now, as I sat in my car, parked a few blocks from a warehouse, I realized I was following him. The warehouse was old. It had been used for storage once, but it looked abandoned now. The paint was peeling. The windows were dark. The doors were locked. But there was a smell in the air that didn't belong to an abandoned building. It was the smell of fabric. And something else. A faint, sweet scent, like baby powder, like perfume, like a scent that belonged in a room where someone was trying to comfort a child. I sat in my car for a long time watching the building. My hands were on the steering wheel. My knuckles were white. I kept thinking about the victims. Their calm faces. Their quiet breathing. The way they looked like they were waiting for someone to come and tuck them in. It made me sick. And it made me angry. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The air was cold, but it felt strangely still, like the world had paused. I walked to the warehouse door and pressed my ear to it. Inside, I could hear something faint. A hum. A sound like a machine. A sound like a lullaby playing from a distance. My heart started to beat faster. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. It was late. Too late. But the killer didn't care about time. He cared about sleep. I found a side door that wasn't locked. It had been forced open at some point, and the metal was bent. I pushed it gently and slipped inside. The darkness swallowed me. My eyes adjusted slowly. I could make out rows of stacked crates, old furniture, broken appliances, the kind of place where things go to die. And then I saw the van. It was parked in the center of the warehouse, like it had been placed there with care. It was unmarked, no logo, no windows, just a plain white van with a dented side door. I walked closer. My shoes made a soft sound on the concrete floor. The van's side door was slightly open. A thin line of light spilled out. The smell was stronger now. Fabric, perfume, something that reminded me of a nursery. I stepped closer, my hand trembling. I pulled the door open. The inside of the van was filled with mattresses. Rows of them, stacked on top of each other. Some were clean, some were stained, some looked new, some looked old. They were all neatly arranged, like someone had spent hours making sure they fit perfectly. On the floor there were boxes. Boxes of tapes. Lullaby tapes. Old cassette tapes, like something from another era. I picked one up and looked at the label. The label was handwritten. It said, "Sleep soundly." Another said, "Dream tonight." Another said, "Peaceful rest." I felt a chill run down my spine. The killer had been collecting these tapes. He had been preparing. He had been building something. I sat on one of the mattresses, careful not to touch the stains. I listened. The hum was louder now, coming from the back of the van. I walked deeper inside. There was a small portable cassette player on the floor. It was old, but it was plugged into a small battery pack. The player was running. The tape was playing. The sound was soft. A lullaby. It was the kind of lullaby you hear in a nursery. The kind of song that makes you feel safe. The kind of song that makes your eyes heavy. The melody was simple, but there was something wrong about it. It was too slow, too steady, like it was designed to lull you into something deeper than sleep. I reached down and turned the player off. The silence hit me like a wall. The warehouse seemed louder without the music. My breathing sounded too loud. My heart sounded too loud. I stood up and looked around. That's when I saw the mattresses again. Not just the ones stacked, but the ones laid out. In a row, as if someone had been using them. As if someone had been sleeping there. I moved closer to the row. I saw a pillow, a blanket, a small stuffed toy, a child's toy, a teddy bear. It was old, worn. The fur was matted. It looked like it had been loved, but it also looked like it had been abandoned. I picked it up. The bear was heavier than it should have been. I looked at the stitching. There was a small tag on the bear's ear. A name. A date. It matched one of the missing persons. One of the victims. I dropped the bear back onto the mattress. My hands were shaking now. I stepped back and my foot hit something on the floor. I looked down. A tape. Another cassette. This one was different. It wasn't labeled. It was plain. Just a blank white case. I picked it up and held it close to my face. The tape inside was wound tight, like it had never been played. I turned it over. There was writing on the back. A name. My name. My address. The date. Today. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the tape until my eyes blurred. My mind tried to reject it. It tried to tell me it was a coincidence. It tried to tell me someone had played a cruel joke. But I knew better. I had been following a pattern. The killer had been leading me. He had been leaving me clues. He had been waiting for me to find this. He wanted me to see the van. He wanted me to see the mattresses. He wanted me to see the tape with my name on it. And he wanted me to know that he could reach me, that he could touch my life, that he could make me part of his world. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving the tape. I felt like I was walking through thick fog. My body was moving, but my mind was trapped. I reached the van's door and pulled it closed. The sound echoed in the warehouse. The hum started again. The lullaby returned. Soft, slow, steady. I stood there frozen, listening. The music was coming from inside the van. Even though I had turned the player off, even though the tape was off, I felt my stomach drop. The lullaby was still playing. The melody was the same, but it sounded like it was coming from everywhere, like it was inside my head, like it was inside the walls. I covered my ears, but the sound didn't stop. It only grew quieter in the distance, like a dream fading. I stumbled out of the warehouse, my heart pounding, my legs weak. I didn't look back. I ran to my car and drove away without thinking. The city lights blurred. My vision was shaky. My mind was racing. I kept seeing the mattresses, the teddy bear, the tape, my name, the lullaby. I drove until I reached a bridge and I pulled over. I sat in my car, breathing hard, trying to calm down. I told myself I was safe. I told myself the killer couldn't reach me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the van wasn't just a vehicle. It was a moving bedroom, a mobile nursery, a place where the killer could carry his victims without anyone noticing, a place where he could make people sleep. And now, with my name on that tape, I knew he wasn't just collecting victims. He was collecting stories. He was collecting lives. He was collecting me. I sat there for a long time, staring at the road. The lullaby was still in my head. Soft, slow, steady, like a hand on my shoulder, like a whisper in the dark. And I knew, with a certainty that made my blood run cold, that the killer was closer than I thought. Not just in the city, not just in the warehouse, but closer, in my life, in my home, in my sleep, because the pattern wasn't over. It was only beginning, and the lullaby was still playing, not because it was impossible, but because it made everything I had been doing feel like a lie. I had been following a pattern. I had been chasing a killer. I had been trying to find a man who put people to sleep and left them like dolls in their own beds. But now, after the van, after the lullaby tapes, after the tape with my name on it, I realized the truth was something else entirely. He wasn't killing people. He was collecting them. Not their bodies, not their money, their dreams. And the worst part was that he didn't need to touch them. He didn't need to break in. He didn't need to strangle them, or poison them, or stab them. He only needed to reach their minds. And he had already reached mine. I sat in my living room that night, staring at the tape on my coffee table. The label was blank on one side, but my name was written on the other. My address, the date. I kept thinking about the van, the mattresses, the lullaby. I kept thinking about the victims, the way they had been found, the way they had been asleep. Not dead, just asleep. It was like they were in a dream that never ended. I turned the tape over in my hands again, as if I could find a clue hidden in the plastic. I remembered the feeling of the lullaby inside my head, the way it had been soft, slow, steady, the way it had felt like a hand on my shoulder. I thought about the clinic, the peaceful sleep therapy, the notes that said they are ready. I thought about the mirror in the treatment room. I thought about the figure in the bed. I thought about the words written in the fog. Peaceful sleep. It wasn't about sleep. It was about dreams. And the killer wasn't killing them. He was keeping them. He was holding them in a place where they couldn't wake up. A place where he could visit them. A place where he could take what he wanted. I put the tape down and stood up. I walked to my bedroom. I stared at my bed. It looked normal. It looked like it always had. But now I couldn't see it as a bed. I saw it as a door to a world I didn't want to enter. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to think clearly. I tried to remember the last time I had slept, the last time I had dreamed. I realized I couldn't. My sleep had been shallow for weeks. I had been waking up in the middle of the night, sweating, with the taste of metal in my mouth. I had been having the same feeling over and over. Like someone was watching me. Like someone was standing behind my eyes. I had dismissed it as stress, as age, as the mind playing tricks on me. But now I knew. The killer had been inside my mind for a long time. He had been waiting. He had been listening. He had been collecting my dreams like he collected the victims. And the worst part was, I could feel him there. Not like a presence, not like a ghost, like a memory, like a thought that wasn't mine. I lay down on the bed slowly, as if I was entering a room I didn't want to be in. I stared at the ceiling. I tried to control my breathing. I tried to stay awake, but sleep came anyway. It wasn't sudden. It was slow. It was gentle, like the lullaby. I felt my eyes grow heavy. I felt my body relax. I felt the world soften around the edges. And then I was somewhere else. Not in my bedroom. Not in my house. Not in the city. I was in a room that felt familiar. A room with a bed. A room with a mirror. A room with a lullaby playing softly in the background. I looked around. The bed was the same as mine. The mirror was the same. The air smelled like perfume. I felt my heart start to race. I sat up. The room was empty, but the feeling of being watched was strong. I looked into the mirror. I saw myself, but my reflection was different. My eyes looked tired. My face looked older. And behind me, in the reflection, I saw a figure. Not a ghost. Not a person. Something like a shadow with a shape. It was sitting on the bed. It was calm. It was still. It was smiling. I turned around. The bed was empty. The room was empty. I looked back at the mirror. The figure was still there. It was holding something in its hands. A dream catcher. A real one. A handmade dream catcher with beads and feathers. But it wasn't hanging. It was being held. And the dream catcher was moving. Slowly. Like it was catching something. Like it was collecting. I watched, frozen, as the dream catcher's web seemed to pull something from the air. A thread of light. A thread of sound. A thread of memory. The dream catcher was collecting the dream. It was collecting my dream. I felt a pull in my chest, like someone was tugging on my heart, like someone was pulling me toward the dream catcher. I tried to move. I tried to speak, but my body wouldn't respond. The dream was controlling me. I could feel the killer's presence in the room. I could feel him watching me through the mirror. I could feel him smiling. I realized something then. The killer didn't need to be in the room with his victims. He didn't need to be in the same city. He didn't even need to be alive. He only needed to be in the dream. He only needed to be inside the mind. And he had already entered mine. I watched the dream catcher collect the thread of my dream, and I understood why the victims looked calm. They weren't afraid. They weren't struggling. They were in a place where fear didn't exist. A place where the killer had control. A place where the dream was his. The dream catcher moved again, and the thread of light was pulled into the web. The lullaby grew louder. The room began to spin slowly. The walls softened. The bed seemed to float. I felt myself slipping. I felt myself being drawn into the dream catcher. I tried to fight, but the dream was too strong. I could hear a voice. Not loud. Not clear. Just a whisper. A voice that sounded like it was coming from inside my own head. Sleeper. 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 The words were gentle. Like a mother singing. Like a nurse soothing a patient. Like a lullaby. I felt my eyes close. I felt my body relax. I felt the dream catcher pull me in. And then, just as I was about to be swallowed by the dream, I woke up. I was in my bed. My heart was pounding. My skin was damp with sweat. The room was dark. The air was quiet. I sat up slowly and looked around. Everything looked normal, but I knew it was. I looked at the clock. It was early morning. I had slept. I had dreamed. And the dream had been real. I looked at my bedside table. The tape was still there. My name on it. My address. The date. Today. I picked it up and held it tightly. My hands were shaking. I realized something that made my blood run cold. The dream had been a warning, or a message, or a test. The killer had entered my mind. He had shown me the dream catcher. He had shown me the way he collected dreams. And he had let me wake up. But why? Why would he let me wake up? I sat there staring at the tape, listening to the silence. And I understood. He wasn't just collecting dreams. He was collecting people who could dream. He was collecting people who could remember. He was collecting people who could tell the story. And now he had entered my mind. He had planted the dream catcher. He had marked me. He had made me part of his collection. Because the truth was this: he wasn't hunting victims. He was hunting storytellers. He was hunting the ones who could see the pattern. And now he had found me. He had entered my mind. And he was waiting. Waiting for me to fall asleep again. Waiting for me to dream. Waiting for me to become part of the dream he controlled. I sat in the quiet of my room, holding the tape, listening to my own breathing, and I realized that the most dangerous part of the killer wasn't his hands. It was his mind. The first time I saw the house, I thought it was a mistake. Not the house itself. The house looked fine from the outside. It had a small porch, a cracked pathway, and a yard that needed mowing, but it had character. It looked like the kind of place someone could grow into. The kind of place where you could picture yourself making dinner and laughing at the table, where you could imagine waking up to sunlight on the walls. It was the price that felt like a mistake. The price was too low. It was the kind of price you see in a newspaper, next to a warning about foreclosures. The kind of price that makes you wonder if the listing agent forgot a zero. The kind of price that makes you call your partner and say, "Are you seeing this?" We were young. We had just moved to the city for work and we had been renting for too long. We wanted a place of our own, a place we could call home. We had been saving, but not enough to buy something like this. When we saw the listing, we joked about it. We said things like, "It must be haunted," or "Maybe the house is made of gold." But the more we thought about it, the more we felt drawn to it. It was almost like the house was calling us. We went to see it. The real estate agent was a woman with tired eyes and a soft voice. She showed us around, pointing out the features. The house had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a living room, and a basement. The walls were painted a pale color, and the floors creaked in the way old houses do. There were old photos in frames on the walls, but the pictures had been removed. Only the frames remained like empty eyes. When we asked why the price was so low, the agent hesitated. She glanced at the previous owner, who was sitting on the porch steps. He was an old man with a weathered face and hands that looked like they had spent a lifetime working. His clothes were clean, but his eyes were tired. The agent cleared her throat and said, "It's a special situation." The old man looked up at us. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just stared. And then he said in a quiet voice, "You must never stay past midnight." We laughed at first. It was a nervous laugh, the kind of laugh you make when you don't know how to respond to something strange. My partner Emma smiled and said, "That's a funny rule." The old man's eyes didn't change. He said, "It's not a rule, it's a warning." The agent stepped closer and said, "Mr. Hale, please, they don't need to hear." But the old man cut her off. He looked at us again, and his voice dropped even lower. "If you stay past midnight," he said, "you won't leave the same." Emma and I exchanged a glance. We thought it was a sales tactic, a way to scare us into paying more, a way to make the house feel like a story. But the old man's voice had something in it that felt real, something that made the air in the yard feel colder. We asked him why. He didn't answer at first. He looked down at his hands, as if he was remembering something. Then he said, "I stayed once." Emma's smile faded. I felt my stomach tighten. The old man continued, "I thought I could handle it. I thought I could prove it was nothing. I thought I was strong." He looked up at us again, his eyes filled with something like regret. "But the house, it doesn't let you leave the same." The agent stepped in again, trying to change the subject. She said, "Mr. Hale, we should go, the paperwork." But the old man shook his head. He said, "No, they need to know." Emma and I stood there, feeling the weight of his words. We wanted to leave. We wanted to walk away and never look back. But the house felt like it had already reached into us, like it had already decided we were its next residents. We asked the agent if there was anything wrong with the house, anything we should know. She hesitated again. Then she said, "There was an accident years ago. The previous owner, he lost his wife. She died in the house." Emma's face went pale. I felt a chill. The old man spoke again. "She didn't die from a fall," he said. "She didn't die from sickness." He paused, as if the words were difficult to say. "She died because she stayed." Emma swallowed hard. "Stayed where?" The old man looked at the house. He didn't look at us. He looked at the windows, as if he could see inside. He said, "Inside." He looked back at us, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "Inside the night." Emma and I stood in silence. The sun was still out. The day was still bright. The world felt normal. But the old man's words made the air feel thin. We asked the agent how long the house had been on the market. She said a few months. We asked why no one had bought it. She shrugged. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe people are afraid of the price." The old man's voice cut through the air again. "People are afraid of the night," he said. Emma and I looked at each other. We were both thinking the same thing. What if he was telling the truth? What if the house was dangerous? What if the house was haunted? But the thought of leaving the house behind, after seeing it, after feeling that strange pull, felt impossible. It felt like we had already made a choice. The agent handed us the keys. She said, "If you decide to buy, the paperwork is ready." We took the keys. The old man stood up slowly and walked toward the door. He stopped at the porch. He looked at us one last time. Then he said, "If you hear something at night, don't answer it." Emma frowned. "Answer what?" The old man's eyes seemed to drift into the distance. He said, "The voice." And then he turned and walked away. The agent tried to act normal again. She smiled and said, "Well, congratulations, you're homeowners." But her smile didn't reach her eyes. We drove away with the keys in our hands. The house sat behind us, quiet and still. We didn't talk much on the drive home. The silence was heavy. It felt like we were carrying something. That night we moved in. We unpacked boxes. We arranged furniture. We laughed at small things, trying to make the house feel like ours. But the house didn't feel like ours. It felt like it was waiting. When night fell, we ate dinner and went to bed early. We wanted to be tired. We wanted to sleep. We wanted to prove to ourselves that the old man was just a strange man with a strange story. We set an alarm for 11:30 p.m. just to be safe, just to make sure we didn't stay past midnight. We laughed about it, trying to make the fear feel silly. At 11:15, we turned off the lights. The house felt different in the dark. The walls seemed closer. The shadows seemed deeper. The air felt heavier. Emma turned to me and whispered, "Do you feel that?" I nodded. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I felt it too. Like the house was listening. Like the house was waiting. The clock ticked slowly. We lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence was thick. At 11:50, I heard a sound. A soft sound. A whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind. But the house was still. The whisper came again. This time, I could make out the words. "Come closer," it said. Emma's hand tightened around mine. I whispered, "Did you hear that?" She nodded. The whisper came again. "Come closer." It sounded like someone calling from a distance. Like a voice that had been waiting for you to answer. The clock ticked closer to midnight. I felt my heart pounding. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. But the voice kept calling. It sounded like it was coming from the hallway, from the living room, from the kitchen, from the walls. It sounded like the house itself was speaking. The clock struck midnight. The moment the second hand moved, the house changed. The air became colder. The shadows moved. The silence deepened. The voice whispered again, softer this time. "Welcome home." Emma pulled the covers over her head. I sat up. I stared at the door. I felt a strange pressure in my chest, like something was pressing down on me. I wanted to move. I wanted to run, but my body felt heavy, as if the bed was holding me down. The voice spoke again. It was closer now. It sounded like it was right outside the bedroom door. "Don't be afraid," it said. I whispered, "Who are you?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, the lights in the hallway flickered. The floorboards creaked, and I heard something moving. Slowly, deliberately, like someone walking, like someone packing. I held my breath. I listened. The sound moved closer to our bedroom door. Then it stopped. The house went quiet. The silence was worse than the noise. I waited. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just waited. Then from the hallway, I heard a soft, gentle sound, like someone humming. A lullaby. The kind of song you hear when someone is trying to soothe a child. The kind of song that makes you feel safe. But it didn't make me feel safe. It made me feel trapped. The lullaby continued, and I realized something. The house wasn't trying to scare us. It was trying to comfort us. It was trying to make us stay. It was trying to make us sleep. And I understood the old man's warning. If we stayed past midnight, we wouldn't leave the same. We would become part of the house, part of the night, part of the lullaby. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to stop it. All I knew was that the house was awake now, and it had been waiting for us to fall asleep. I held Emma's hand tightly. I whispered, "We have to leave." But the house didn't want us to leave. The lullaby grew louder. The air grew colder. The bed felt heavier. And I realized, with a fear that felt like ice in my veins, that the house wasn't just a house. It was a trap, and we had just stepped inside it. The first night after we moved in, I thought the house was just settling. Old houses do that. They make strange sounds. The floorboards creak, the pipes click, the walls breathe in the cold. I told myself that 100 times, like a prayer, like something that would keep the fear from growing. But the second night, the sounds changed. The second night, it wasn't the house settling. It was the house speaking. It started the way most strange things start, small, almost harmless. A whisper that could be mistaken for the wind. A soft murmur that felt like it was coming from far away, from behind the walls. Emma was asleep beside me. I watched her breathing. It was slow, steady. Her face looked peaceful, like she was dreaming about something warm. I wanted to join her. I wanted to let myself sleep. But the whispering pulled me out of that comfort. At first, I thought it was my imagination. I thought I was tired, and my mind was making up sounds. But the whispering continued. It sounded like someone speaking from inside the wall. Not loud, not clear, just enough to make the skin on my arms prickle. I sat up slowly. The room was dark. The moonlight came through the curtains and painted pale lines on the floor. The whispering was coming from the wall by the bed. I pressed my ear against it. The sound was faint, but I could make out words or something like words. It wasn't a language I recognized. It sounded like a mouth trying to form sentences underwater. And then, for a moment, it sounded like my name. It wasn't clear, just a soft, breathy sound that could have been anything. But my heart started beating faster. I pulled my head back and stared at the wall. The whispering stopped. The silence returned, heavy and thick. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. But my mind wouldn't stop. I kept thinking about the old man's warning. "Don't answer it," he said. The old man's voice echoed in my mind. The house didn't want us to answer, but the whispering sounded like it wanted something, like it wanted a response. I lay back down, trying to calm my breathing. I told myself I would ignore it. I told myself that if I ignored it, it would go away. But the whispering started again. This time it was closer. It was right behind the wall. It sounded like someone was pressing their face against the plaster, speaking through it. The words were still unclear, but the rhythm was there. Like someone speaking slowly, carefully, as if they didn't want to be heard. And then I heard a new sound. A soft tapping, like fingernails on wood. It came from the wall beside the bed. Tap, tap, tap. I held my breath. Emma stirred. She didn't wake up, but she shifted slightly, as if the sound had reached her too. The tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. Then a whisper. This time it sounded like it was coming from inside the wall, but it sounded closer. It sounded like someone was right behind the plaster, speaking directly into the room. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the meaning. It felt like a message. like the house was trying to tell us something. I sat up again. I looked at Emma. She was still asleep, but her face had changed. It looked different, like she was dreaming about something that wasn't a dream, like she was remembering something. I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me. I whispered, "Emma." She didn't respond. The whispering continued. It grew louder. Not loud enough to wake us, but loud enough to fill the room. It felt like the house was breathing, like it was alive. I whispered again, "Emma, wake up." She opened her eyes slowly. Her pupils were wide. She looked at me. She looked scared. She whispered, "Do you hear that?" I nodded. The whispering was now louder, clearer. It sounded like multiple voices, like a crowd of people speaking softly, all at once. I felt my throat tighten. I tried to speak, but my voice came out thin. "What is it saying?" I asked. Emma shook her head. "I don't know," she whispered. "It sounds like someone is calling." The whispering continued, and I realized something. It wasn't just whispering. It was trying to communicate. It sounded like the house was trying to speak to us, like it was trying to reach us through the walls. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't just fear. It was something else. A feeling like being watched. A feeling like the house was learning us. I tried to stand up. My legs felt heavy. The bed felt like it was holding me down. I looked at the wall. The whispering stopped for a moment. Then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A soft, slow breathing, like someone was right behind the wall, breathing into the room. The breathing continued. The whispering started again. This time it was clearer. I could make out a few words, not in English, but in a tone that felt familiar, like a lullaby, like a song my mother used to hum when I was a child. The words were not clear, but the feeling was there. Comfort, safety, sleep. The house was trying to lull us. The house was trying to put us to sleep. I felt my eyes grow heavy. I felt my body relax. I felt the fear slipping away, like the whispering was pulling me into a dream. I forced myself to sit up. I forced myself to stay awake. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The light cut through the darkness, creating a small circle of brightness on the wall. The whispering stopped. The breathing stopped. The silence returned. I stared at the wall. The light flickered. For a moment, I thought I saw something move behind the plaster. A shadow, a shape, but it was gone. The whispering started again. It was louder now. It sounded like the house was angry, like it didn't like the light, like it didn't like being seen. Emma whispered, "We need to leave." I nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't try to rationalize it. I just knew. We needed to leave. I grabbed my keys from the nightstand. Emma sat up, her eyes wide. We moved quickly but quietly. We didn't want to wake the house. We didn't want to make it angry. We moved through the hallway. The whispering followed us. It sounded like it was moving through the walls, like it was chasing us. We reached the front door. I fumbled with the lock. My hands were shaking. Emma whispered, "Hurry." I turned the key. The door opened. The cold night air rushed in. I stepped outside. Emma followed. We stood on the porch, breathing in the night. The whispering continued inside the house, but it sounded different now. It sounded like the house was speaking to itself, like it was disappointed, like it had lost something. I looked back at the window. The living room was dark. The house looked quiet, still. but I could feel it watching us. I whispered, "Do you think it will stop?" Emma shook her head. "I don't know," she said. We stood there for a long time, listening to the house, listening to the whispering, the voices behind the walls. They sounded like they were talking to each other, like they were sharing secrets, like they were waiting for us to return. I realized something then. The house wasn't just haunted. It wasn't just a place with a dark past. It was alive in a way I couldn't explain. It was aware. It was hungry. And it wanted us. It wanted us to stay. It wanted us to listen. It wanted us to become part of the whispering. I held Emma's hand. We didn't go back inside that night. We slept in the car. We didn't talk much. The whispering stayed with us, even outside the house. It felt like it was inside our heads, like it had followed us. In the morning, we went back to the house. We had to get our things. We had to decide what to do. The house looked normal in daylight. The yard looked normal. The windows looked normal. But the walls held secrets. The whispering was still there. Quiet, soft, waiting. And I knew, with a certainty that made my skin crawl, that the house was not done with us. Not yet. The voices behind the walls were still speaking. And they were getting louder. I didn't plan on going into the basement. I didn't even know the house had won. It was one of those things you only notice when you're desperate, when you're already convinced the world is hiding something from you, and you start looking for it in places you never thought to look before. The house had been quiet all day, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Emma and I spent the afternoon packing our things, not because we were leaving, not yet. We were packing because we felt like the house was watching us, and we didn't know what it wanted. We told ourselves we were being paranoid. We told ourselves we were overreacting. But the house didn't care about our excuses. The whispering had started again that night, but it was different. It wasn't coming from the walls now. It was coming from somewhere deeper. From below. We were in the kitchen, trying to make sense of what we'd heard the night before. We were trying to tell ourselves the whispering was just the wind, or the pipes, or a neighbor. But then we heard it. A faint sound, like a voice calling from far away. It was coming from the floor. Not from the walls. From beneath the house. Emma froze. I felt my stomach drop. We stood there listening. The sound was a low, steady whisper, like someone was speaking right under the wood. It sounded like a name, like a plea, like a warning. I walked to the corner of the kitchen, where the floor felt slightly different. There was a seam in the wood, a line that didn't match the rest of the floorboards. I knelt down and ran my fingers along it. The seam was slightly raised, like a door, like a trapdoor. Emma came closer. Her face was pale. She whispered, "What is that?" I didn't answer. My hands were shaking. I pressed my fingers to the seam. It was warm. Not just warm. Hot. Like something was alive under there. I felt a sudden urge to open it. A part of me wanted to run. Another part of me wanted to know. The whispering grew louder. It sounded like it was right beneath us. Like it was waiting. I took a deep breath. I found the latch. It was hidden under a thin layer of dust. I pulled it. The latch clicked. The sound echoed through the kitchen. Emma gasped. I pulled the trapdoor open. A dark space opened beneath the floor. A narrow set of stairs led down into the darkness. The smell that rose up was old and damp. It smelled like forgotten things, like a room that had been sealed for years. Emma grabbed my arm. "Don't," she whispered. but I was already looking down. The stairs were steep. The air that came up from below was cold. It felt like the house was exhaling. I turned on my phone flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness. The stairs disappeared into the shadows. I looked at Emma. She looked terrified, but she nodded. Not because she wanted to go down, because she couldn't stand the thought of being left alone upstairs with the whispering. We stepped down together. The wood creaked under our feet. The air grew colder with each step. The whispering grew louder. It was not the same whispering as before. It sounded more urgent, like the house was trying to tell us something important. The stairs ended in a small landing. There was a door, a heavy wooden door with a brass knob. The door looked old, older than the rest of the house. The paint was chipped. The wood was dark. It looked like it had been there for a long time. The whispering was coming from behind it. Emma stood behind me. Her hand was on my shoulder. Her grip was tight, the kind of grip that tells you she was trying to keep herself from running. I reached for the knob. It was cold. The whispering stopped for a moment, like the house was holding its breath. I turned the knob. The door opened. The smell hit us again. Old wood, mold, dust, and something else. Something metallic. The room beyond the door was dim. It looked like a storage room. But it wasn't just storage. It was full of things. Belongings, boxes, clothes, old furniture, a stack of suitcases, a bicycle, a child's toy, a pair of shoes. Everything was arranged carefully, like someone had placed them there on purpose. The whispering started again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from inside the room. Not from the walls, from the objects themselves. The room felt heavy, like it was filled with memories. I stepped inside. Emma followed. The air was thick. The flashlight beam moved across the room. The objects looked like they belonged to different decades. Some were old-fashioned. Some were newer. But they all had something in common. They all looked like they had been left behind, like the owners had vanished. I walked slowly through the room. My eyes scanned the items. A jacket with a torn sleeve. A child's stuffed animal. A set of keys. A broken watch. Everything seemed ordinary. But the feeling was not ordinary. It felt like we were walking through someone's life. Like we were in a place where time had stopped. I noticed a table in the corner. On it there was a stack of papers. The papers looked like old documents. They were covered in dust. I walked over. I picked up the top sheet. It was a list of names. Each name had a date next to it. The dates were written in neat handwriting. The dates were the dates people had disappeared. I felt my heart start to pound. I looked at the names. Some were familiar. Some were not. But the dates were all recent. All within the last few years. I turned the page. More names. More dates. The list seemed endless. My hands were shaking. I looked at Emma. Her face was pale. Her eyes were wide. She whispered, "Oh my God." I looked closer at the dates. The dates were in order, like a timeline. The most recent date was the day we moved in. My stomach dropped. I felt sick. I flipped the page. There was another list. This one had a name at the top. My name. My full name. And a date. The date was tomorrow. I stared at it. My mind went blank. The whispering grew louder. It sounded like it was coming from the objects, like the house was speaking through them. I felt a cold wave run through my body. Emma grabbed my arm. "Come on," she whispered. But I couldn't move. I was frozen. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the list. I felt like the room was closing in, like the objects were watching me. The whispering was getting clearer. I could make out words now, not full sentences, just fragments. "Stay. Sleep. Don't leave. Come back." I felt my throat tighten. I looked at Emma. She was shaking. Tears were in her eyes. The whispering continued. It sounded like a chorus of voices, like the house was full of people, like the house was full of the missing. I backed away from the table. The flashlight beam shook. The whispering grew louder. I felt a sudden urge to run, to leave, to get out of the room. Emma pulled me toward the door. We ran up the stairs. The wood creaked under our feet. The whispering followed us. It felt like it was chasing us. We burst out of the basement door and slammed it shut. The sound echoed through the kitchen. The whispering stopped. The house fell silent. For a moment, I thought we were safe. But then I heard something. A faint sound, like a pen scratching on paper. From inside the walls. The house was writing. The house was keeping a record. And now it had added our names. I looked at Emma. She was breathing hard. Her face was pale. She whispered, "We have to leave." I nodded. We didn't argue. We didn't try to think of a plan. We just knew. The basement door was not just a door. It was a gateway. A place where the house kept what it took. A place where it kept the people who vanished. And now it had our date. Tomorrow. I held Emma's hand. We stood in the kitchen. The house was quiet again. But the silence was worse than the whispering. It felt like the house was waiting. Waiting for us to fall asleep. Waiting for us to disappear. And I knew, with a certainty that made my skin crawl, that the basement door was not the end of the house's secrets. I used to believe houses were just walls and wires and wood. That belief didn't survive the night the house spoke my name. After the basement, Emma and I didn't sleep. We sat on the couch with the lights on, our bags packed, coats still on our bodies like armor. The front door was only 10 steps away, but neither of us crossed the room to open it. Not because we didn't want to leave. Because the house didn't seem to want us to go. Every time I stood up, my legs felt heavy. Every time Emma reached for the door handle, she hesitated, like she'd forgotten why she was doing it. The air felt thick, like breathing through warm cloth. The clock on the wall ticked too loud, then too soft, then stopped completely at 11:58. Midnight was coming. The warning from the previous owner echoed in my head. His shaking hands, his cracked voice, never stay past midnight. I checked my phone. No signal. Emma's phone was the same. The Wi-Fi symbol blinked and vanished. Outside, the streetlight flickered once, then went dark. The house settled, wood creaking slow and deep, like joints bending after a long sleep. Then the whispering came back. Not from the walls this time. From everywhere. It didn't sound rushed. It didn't sound angry. It sounded patient. Kind, even, like someone trying not to scare a child. "Stay," the voice said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It was calm. Emma stiffened beside me. I felt her hand find mine. Her fingers were cold. "I heard it," she whispered. "You heard it too, right?" I nodded. My mouth was dry. The voice hadn't echoed. It hadn't bounced around the room. It felt like it came from inside my head, but deeper. Like a memory I didn't recognize. "You're safe here," the house said. The lights dimmed, not suddenly, but gently, like someone lowering their voice. The air warmed. The fear in my chest eased just a little, and that scared me more than anything else. Because it felt good. Emma shook her head hard like she was trying to wake up. "No," she said out loud. "No, we're leaving." She stood up and took 2 steps toward the door. The floor creaked under her feet, long and slow. "Emma," the house said. I felt her freeze. The voice said her name the way her mother did when she was worried. Soft, careful, loving. Emma turned to me, eyes wide. I never told it my name. The door handle moved on its own. Not opening, just enough to click. A quiet reminder. The house sighed. "You already belong," it said. "Both of you do." Memories began to surface that weren't mine. Flashes, moments. A man sitting in this same living room rubbing his temples. A woman crying quietly in the bedroom. A child counting cracks in the ceiling at night. Different faces. Same fear, same house. I staggered back against the wall. They didn't leave, the house continued. They stayed, they listened, they learned. Emma covered her ears. "Stop," she said, but her voice wavered. "Please stop." The house didn't raise its voice. It didn't need to. "You feel it," it said. "The quiet, the rest, the way sleep comes easier here." I realized something then. I was tired. Not just sleepy. Exhausted in a deep, aching way, like I'd been carrying something heavy for years and had just set it down. The couch looked softer. The walls seemed closer, warmer, familiar. Like home. I hated that thought. I forced myself toward the door, grabbed the handle and pulled. It didn't move. Not locked. Just unwilling. The hallway stretched behind us, longer than it should have been. The bedroom door at the end looked farther away, its edges blurry, like a dream that didn't want to end. "You didn't buy this house," the voice said gently. "You were chosen." The words settled into me like a stone. Chosen. Images returned. The basement lists, the dates, the names, not victims. Residents. Caretakers. I remembered the old owner's eyes. The way he looked relieved when we signed the papers. The way he didn't argue about the price. He hadn't sold the house. He'd escaped it. Emma slid down the wall, sobbing quietly now. "I don't want this," she whispered. "I don't want to be here forever." The house was quiet for a long moment. Then it spoke again, slower this time. "Forever is not what you think," it said. "Time rests here, pain softens. You won't age the way you fear." I felt something brush my thoughts, not invading, inviting, showing me a version of us years from now, calm, settled, moving through the rooms like they were extensions of our bodies, showing me peace without effort. It was tempting. That frightened me more than any whisper. I thought of the basement again, the belongings, the dates, the people who had stayed long enough to be absorbed, remembered only by the house itself. "Tell us the truth," I said, my voice barely steady. "What happens to us?" The house paused. That pause felt important. "You become part of me," it said. "And I become part of you. I keep you. I keep your voices, your dreams, your warmth." I understood then why the walls whispered, why the house felt lived in, why it knew our names. It wasn't haunted. It was inhabited. Emma looked up at me, eyes red, desperate. "We can't stay," she said. "Promise me we won't stay." I wanted to promise. But the house spoke again, and this time it sounded closer than ever. "You already stayed past midnight." The clock on the wall ticked. 12:01. The front door creaked open an inch. Cold air rushed in, sharp and real. The street outside looked wrong, too dark, too flat, like a picture instead of a place. "You may leave," the house said softly, "but you will carry me with you." The whispering surged, filling my head with images of other homes, other rooms, other nights. I realized then that the house didn't need walls. It needed people. We stepped outside together. The door closed behind us, slow and final. The air felt thin, empty. I thought we were free. Until I heard it again, later that night, when we were miles away. A quiet whisper, right behind my eyes. Welcome home.